Chapter 1400. Luo Fan's words were naturally directed at Kai Buozi. The current situation was naturally the most advantageous for Kai Buozi. Such an advantageous situation was clearly very targeted. This made Luo Fan suspect whether Kai Buozi had used some sort of method to manipulate his own luck to oppress Luo Fan's luck, thus causing Luo Fan to involuntarily create this situation. This is not impossible. Kai Buozi is a level 8 pseudo-saint, after all, and is only a little away from level 9 pseudo-saint. It wouldn't be surprising if he had some method to change his own luck in the River of Luck. Luo Fan's expression became extremely ugly as he thought of this. He glanced at Kai Buozi, who seemed to have gained some sort of enlightenment in the wormhole and was heading towards the entrance of the next world. He raised his hand and waved. In an instant, the many universes disappeared into the void. Although he could not go back on his word and stop Kai Buozi's test, because he had not confirmed the truth yet, this did not mean that he was willing to look at Kai Buozi again. However, this did not mean that he was willing to look at Kai Buozi again. After hiding the many universes, Luo Fan began to carefully sense the point on the River of Luck that corresponded to him. He then sensed the point that was extremely far away from him, but through some special method, he was able to exert pressure on the point that corresponded to him. Whether it was the method of Kai Buozi or the situation caused by the natural operation of the River of Luck, Luo Fan was definitely not willing to be a supporting character and become a foil for Kai Buozi's opportunity so that Kai Buozi could use his power to obtain benefits. Therefore, obviously, given this mentality, the first thing that Luo Fan had to do was to eliminate the oppression that Kai Buozi's luck had on his luck. He had to let his luck return to its original independent state. Luo Fan wanted to cut off his connection with the River of Luck so that he could obtain true freedom and not be controlled by the River of Luck. Right now, he couldn't do this because of his ability, but it didn't mean that he had succumbed to the River of Luck. Adding the River of Luck to himself wasn't something that came from his heart. Clearly, this was the control that the River of Luck had over him. Of course, this kind of control was something he abhorred the most. When Luo Fan used all his attention to sense it, this originally huge and incomparably long River of Luck began to constantly change. It looked like a long river that flowed like water. Gradually, they turned into small dots. Each of them seemed to be the same little dots that corresponded to Luo Fan and the long River of Luck. These little dots, they were tightly packed together, gathered in one place. It was almost like the legendary atoms formed this long river. In fact, according to the research of scientific and technological civilization, every substance in the world was made up of various atoms through various special combinations. The river water seemed to be continuous without any gaps, but in fact, it was also made up of tiny atoms. In the long River of Luck, the little dots that corresponded to Luo Fan and the long River of Luck were like atoms in the river water. After being densely packed together, they formed the original river water of the long River of Luck. Strictly speaking, the dot that corresponded to Luo Fan on the long River of Luck was just an ordinary dot in the river water. The reason why Luo Fan could discover his own was that he couldn't discover that the other river water of the long River of Luck was also made up of these dots. The reason was extremely simple. It was like a black dot on a piece of white paper that was extremely obvious. Because this dot was closely related to him, he was able to find it among the endless small dots. Most people would notice the existence of a black dot on a piece of white paper at a glance. Not because the black dot was huge, but because the black dot was different from the others. In other words, it was easy to understand. If one didn't view a piece of white paper as a whole, but as a combination of countless parts of the same size as the black dot, the piece of white paper would become countless dots. Among them, one would be a black dot, while the rest would be white dots. This situation was very similar to the situation in the long River of Luck, so that's how it is. I should have thought of it. Luo Fan sighed. The long River of Luck filled the demon realm and the entire earth. It even filled the entire chaotic state. Such a massive River of Luck was actually formed from these tiny specks that were like specks of dust so it was obvious how many specks there were in it. Furthermore, every single one of these dots represented someone's luck. It was easy to imagine how many living beings were behind all of these dots. After figuring this out, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel shocked. Previously, when he sensed that he was still under the control of the long river of luck, he instinctively wanted to break free from it. However, he didn't think about how vast and terrifying the long river of luck was. Now that he was truly comprehending the long river of luck, he finally realized how terrifying the reality behind the long river of luck was. Can I really break free from such a vast, long river of luck? Luo Fan couldn't help but wonder. An inexplicable bitter smile gradually appeared on his face. However, his Dao heart was extremely firm in the end, and it was perfect and flawless. Thus, he quickly recovered from his shock. No matter how vast and unbelievable the long river of luck was, he had to break free from the shackles of the long river of luck if he wanted to obtain true eternity and true freedom. He had to sever the connection between himself and the long river of luck. After making up his mind, Luo Fan continued to sense the long river of luck. As his senses went deeper, he gradually discovered many things that he didn't know before. The dot that he corresponded to in the long river of luck existed in the entire long river of luck. The endless dots were all closely connected. Around the point that he was pointing at, there were countless points that were tightly binding that point. That point was also restraining every other point, and the other points were also restraining each other. Just like that, the restraints continuously overlapped and repeated, making it difficult for the countless specks to move freely. They were all affected by the countless specks in the surroundings at all times, flowing along with the flow of the luck river at all times, unable to act on their own. He couldn't break free this. This was the truth of the long river of luck. This was the fundamental reason why Luo Fan couldn't break free from the influence of the long river of luck. Just the points that Luo Fan could sense at this time, which were closely related to his corresponding point, had already been calculated in the trillions of trillions behind the long river of luck that Luo Fan couldn't sense. Moreover, there were countless deeper layers of forces acting on that dot. This was calculated. There were countless trillions of dots in this area that he could sense that were connected to the dot that he corresponded to. This kind of interaction was almost beyond the limits of what numbers could describe. To break free from the long river of luck, it was equivalent to completely cutting off the influence that was beyond the limits of what numbers could describe. One could only imagine the difficulty of this task. It should be known that, even on the same planet, it was almost impossible to completely cut off the relationship between two people. No matter how you tried to avoid it, no matter how hard you tried to cut off contact with someone, or how hard you tried to avoid contact with that person, you could always be contacted by that person through the circulation of a few friends. This was even the case for a single person on a single planet. To cut off contact with countless people in countless worlds was obviously countless times more difficult than cutting off contact with a single person. As his understanding of the long river of luck deepened, Luo Fan understood how big of a project he had to do in the future. However, even so, he wasn't discouraged. Although the difficulty was greater than he had imagined, he had already mentally prepared himself for any difficulty. After carefully sensing for a while, Luo Fan threw other problems to the back of his mind and began to carefully sense the connection between his dot and the dot that Kai Fu corresponded to. This time, he sensed the long river of luck to get rid of the suppression formed by Kai Fu's luck on his own luck. As for sensing other things, that was a matter for the future. If he wasted time sensing those things now, he obviously couldn't distinguish the priority. When Luo Fan completely focused his senses on these two dots, the two dots became bigger and bigger in his senses. At first, it was just like a speck of dust, but after a while, it became the size of a fist, and after a while, it became the size of a basketball. Then, it became the size of a mountain, then a planet, and then a star. Finally, when Luo Fan pushed his senses to the limit and magnified those two dots to the limit of what he could do, The two small dots had each become a vast and boundless world. An illusory speck that was like a speck of dust in the long river of Luckdow had become a vast and boundless world with infinite space and time. Compared to the so-called world in a grain of sand and a bodhi in a leaf, it was countless times greater. World. These two worlds were reflected in Luo Fan's eyes at the same time, and there was a faint smile on his face. The changes in front of him were beyond his expectations. Although he had thought that these dots might change after being magnified to the limit, he only thought that they might be a human figure. For example, the dot corresponding to him would be his body, his image, and the dot corresponding to Kai Fu Zi would be Kai Fu Zi's body, Kai Fu Zi's image. That's all. Unexpectedly, what was happening in front of him was even more mysterious and incredible than he had imagined. These two worlds were more vast and boundless than any world that Luo Fan knew. Each space was hundreds of millions of light years wide, and the existence of all kinds of similar creatures in each world was also endless. It felt like it was even beyond the limits of what could be described with numbers. Half of the creatures in the world that Luo Fan corresponded to were always in that world, playing the role of various identities to survive in that world. They were fighting and scheming against each other in that world, while the other half were like diligent worker bees, constantly entering and exiting that world through some extremely strange methods, going to the countless other world around it. They would either bring some things to those worlds or obtain some strange things from those worlds and bring them back to his world. That was the case in his world. However, the world that Kai Fu corresponded to was not the same. In the world that Kai Fu corresponded to, all the creatures were constantly entering and exiting that world. The entire world was like a transit station or a warehouse. There was no creature residing there at all. All the creatures were constantly moving the things in that world out of that world, and then moving back some strange things from other worlds. Looking at the difference between the two worlds, Luo Fan instantly understood. The reason why his world was so different from the world that Kai Fu corresponded to was because the fundamental reason. It was because he had already cut off a small part of the connection between himself and the long river of luck through the use of the law of cause and effect. Before he cut off that small part of the connection, the world that he corresponded to was definitely the same as the world that Kai Fu corresponded to. It was definitely the same as Kai Fu Zi's world. It also treated the world it corresponded to as a transit station, and there were no living beings living in that world. And if he could really cut off the connection between himself and the long river of luck in the future, then the world that he corresponded to would change again. All the creatures would no longer leave the world that he corresponded to, and instead, they would all settle down and live in his world. However, what was the meaning of this? Luo Fan was still confused at this time. He had just seen these little dots and worlds and had no idea about the nature of those creatures at all. How could he really know the meaning of those creatures staying in that world? With a thought, Luo Fan slightly shifted his gaze and also included the hundreds of thousands of little dots in the surroundings into his own magnified senses. Although there were hundreds of thousands of little dots, from a macroscopic perspective, or perhaps from an ordinary person's point of view, this area was not even a millimeter in diameter. In an instant, hundreds of thousands of worlds were seen by Luo Fan. These hundreds of thousands of worlds, each of them corresponded to the world that Luo Fan and Kai Fu corresponded to. These worlds were also the worlds that had the closest connection with the world that Luo Fan corresponded to. Many of the creatures that left Luo Fan's world had entered these worlds to exchange materials with them. The materials that were brought back from those worlds to Luo Fan's world still had a strange interaction with their original world, which made Luo Fan's world unable to break free, move freely, and leave freely. Obviously, the connection between those materials and the original world was the source of the close connection between the point that Luo Fan corresponded to his own world and other points in the long river of luck that he had sensed from a macroscopic perspective. After discovering this, Luo Fan suddenly understood part of the meaning of leaving those creatures in his own world. If those creatures stayed in the world and did not bring materials to other worlds to exchange for materials, this world would no longer obtain materials from other worlds, and the interaction force that this world received from other worlds would constantly decrease. This was a way to sever the connection. Of course, this was only what Luo Fan had guessed based on his current understanding. As his understanding of that world deepened, he would definitely be able to obtain more and more information and would definitely be able to guess more and more mysteries. With a thought, Luo Fan's perception once again focused on the world that corresponded to him and the world that corresponded to Kai Fu. In an instant, the existences of the two worlds were reflected in his eyes again. To Luo Fan, the world that corresponded to Kai Fu should have been as ordinary as the other world around him. However, at this moment, there was a strange connection between these two worlds, so the world that corresponded to Kai Fu became extremely conspicuous in Luo Fan's eyes. This allowed him to directly find that world among the endless worlds. As Luo Fan observed, he discovered that the number and frequency of creatures coming and going between these two worlds was unimaginably fast. It could be said that it was almost every moment. There were billions of creatures leaving from Luo Fan's world with materials, then entering Kai Fu's world, then bringing materials from Kai Fu's world, returning to Luo Fan's world. Similarly, in the corresponding world of the float, there were also hundreds of millions of creatures carrying materials in a Luo Fan's world, and then bringing materials back from Luo Fan's world. Compared to the countless living beings that constantly entered and exited the two worlds, the number of living beings that numbered in the hundreds of millions was extremely insignificant. It was almost as small as a grain of sand in the normal universe, but it was still an extremely huge number in itself. Compared to Luo Fan's world and other ordinary worlds, there were only 3 to 5 creatures occasionally, 7 to 8 creatures entering and exiting. The difference was obvious at a glance. Luo Fan looked at this change and instantly thought to himself, I see. It seems that as long as I cut off this connection, I can completely eliminate the suppression of luck, eliminating the parts that didn't conform to normal. Naturally, it could make the results that didn't conform to normal disappear. This was just a simple logical deduction, and even an ordinary person could do it. For an existence like Luo Fan, it was naturally no problem at all. However, such an action could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. If he couldn't find the root cause of this anomaly, how could he guarantee that it wouldn't happen again in the future? How could he guarantee that this connection wouldn't be re-established in the future? Sensing such a change, Luo Fan had an idea. He separated a bit of his consciousness to enter his corresponding world to take a look at the situation in that world. He even wanted to use the connection between the worlds to go to Kai Fu's corresponding world. To an existence like Luo Fan, separating his consciousness to enter a certain world was like blinking an ordinary person. It was an almost instinctive action. Normally, as long as he could sense a world, he could easily do this. However, it was clear that the current situation was not an ordinary one. The world in front of him wasn't any of the worlds that Luo Fan had sensed before, but a world in the long river of luck. It was a world that was connected to him in an extremely mysterious and unbelievable way. The originally smooth process couldn't be carried out at this moment. When Luo Fan's consciousness rushed towards that world seemed to be an illusion that didn't exist at all. No matter how his consciousness condensed, collided, or drilled, he could only pass through it. He couldn't even touch that world, let alone enter it. After using thousands of methods and trying tens of thousands of times, Luo Fan finally understood that that world wasn't something that he could come into contact with now. He couldn't help but sigh. Things really aren't that simple. When he saw the root of the connection between these worlds and other worlds, he had vaguely thought of a way to resolve the involuntary connection between his corresponding world and other worlds. Enter that world, seal all living beings, and make them lose the ability to leave that world, thus cutting off this channel of communication with other worlds. Then, he would make his world truly independent, so that his luck would no longer be shackled and affected by the long river of luck. Although he didn't have much hope for this method, and knew that things wouldn't be so simple. It was a train of thought after all. After all, there was a chance that it could solve the problem, so it was naturally impossible not to give it a try. Unfortunately, the long river of luck wasn't even willing to leave this last method for Luo Fan. If he couldn't even really come into contact with the worlds in the long river of luck and couldn't even enter that world, how could he talk about sealing that world and making the living beings in that world lose the ability to leave that world and communicate with other worlds? With a sigh, Luo Fan slowly retracted that bit of will of his. Since this method couldn't succeed, he could only think of other ways. After failing once, Luo Fan focused even more on sensing the two worlds, observing the hundreds of millions of creatures that were exchanging matter between the two worlds. Chapter 1401. Luo Fan could not directly invade the world with his consciousness and sense everything as if he was in the world himself, so he could only use indirect methods to do this. His mind was extremely calm. All of his senses and attention were focused on the two worlds. He tried his best to sense the inside of the two worlds and communicate with each other about the changes that happened to the substances after they entered the two worlds. It was a boundless world, and there were billions of living beings that brought all sorts of substances in and out of the two worlds at all times. It was obviously extremely difficult to find the changes that happened to all the things that were exchanged and to discover the final results of those changes. It was the same for Luo Fan. Luo Fan quietly floated in the cave abode. The two worlds reflected in his eyes slowly rotated. Countless living beings entered and left the two worlds, and the process of circulation became extremely huge, clear, detailed, and detailed. The substances that each living being brought out of a world could be real substances, or they could be illusory and invisible substances. These substances had different properties, and because they were messy, it was difficult to completely separate the substances that were circulating normally from the substances that caused his luck to be suppressed. This made it impossible for Luo Fan to find the results he wanted through this kind of sensing at all. Luo Fan carefully sensed for close to a year. During this year, he memorized the countless substances and even used his outstanding intelligence to combine the countless possible combinations. However, in the end, he discovered that this method could not succeed at all. He couldn't succeed at all. It was impossible for him to find the source of the luck Dao suppression through this method. This method doesn't work at all. As Luo Fan thought this, he frowned deeply. At this moment, he stopped sensing the many living beings that were communicating between the two worlds. The two worlds reflected in his eyes were still rotating in his eyes, but the originally extremely clear living beings that kept entering and leaving the worlds gradually became blurry. Since he couldn't do it from the living beings, he could only do it from the two worlds themselves. Because he couldn't find any way to find what he was looking for, Luo Fan didn't say that he was discouraged. But after all, he would not be in a good mood. In this unpleasant mood, he looked at the two worlds again and suddenly felt reluctant to move. He floated in the cave abode, and his eyes gradually became empty. His attention was locked onto the two worlds, quietly watching the two worlds evolve. Looking at the various incredible natural and civilized landscapes in the two worlds, Lin Fan was stunned. He didn't try to probe or deduce. He just quietly felt the inexplicable emotions brought to him by the various sceneries. During this process, time gradually passed. In the blink of an eye, another 10 years had passed. Suddenly, at a certain moment, Luo Fan suddenly had an incomparably strange feeling. This feeling came from the world that corresponded to him. In that world, he could faintly sense that countless living beings' wills were undergoing an inexplicable change. It was as if they were working together to summon him and chant him. This feeling made Luo Fan's eyes brighten. No matter what he discovered, as long as there was a new discovery, it would be a good thing for him. He carefully savored this strange feeling. His mind gradually merged with this feeling. Then, following this feeling, he slowly sent his will towards the place where the living beings were chanting and summoning. Although he also used his will to enter that world, the situation this time was completely different from the last time. The last time, Luo Fan took the initiative to invade, but this time, the living beings in that world took the initiative to summon him. This change between being active and being passive resulted in two completely different results. Last time, his will couldn't even come into contact with that world. He didn't even have the qualifications to be obstructed by that world. However, this time, he easily threw his will into the world that corresponded to him. He threw his will into the boundless land, into a statue that stood in the center of this world, almost as if it could support the heavens and the earth. This statue was extremely huge and mysterious. As soon as his will entered it, the statue instantly came to life. The body that was originally constructed from all sorts of special materials turned into a body of flesh and blood in the blink of an eye, making him feel like he had gained another body. Sensing this change, Luo Fan, who was in the cave abode, slowly closed his eyes. His attention was completely focused on the will that had entered the corresponding world. Following this change, Luo Fan felt that he had truly stepped into this world. As he looked around, a boundless world appeared before his eyes. It gave him an indescribably mysterious feeling. It was as if he had already entered his own body. Just as Luo Fan was sizing up this world, a voice that was the combination of countless voices came from all directions. "Welcome, Divine Master." Luo Fan lowered his head to look at his feet. He saw that, starting from his feet, there were living beings that looked as tiny as a speck of dust continuously spreading out until they reached beyond his line of sight. Just now, the extremely loud and shocking sound was emitted by these tiny creatures that were as tiny as dust particles. The combined voice of such tiny living beings produced such a shocking effect. Even Luo Fan was shocked. One could imagine how many living beings there were. So, in their eyes, I'm the Divine Master. Luo Fan thought to himself. With a thought, his indomitable body quickly shrunk. In the blink of an eye, he shrunk from his original appearance of stepping on the ground and above his head to the size of a speck of dust, the same size as those living beings. When he shrunk to this extent, the world in his eyes changed once again. The seemingly boundless specks of dust had turned into endless human figures at this moment. They were densely piled up in one place, stretching out in all directions. It had reached a frightening level. Looking into the distance, all he could see were human heads. Apart from the human heads, there was no other terrain. What distant mountains, everything all disappeared. This number had almost reached the number of grains of sand in the Ganges River. 10,000, 10,000, 100 million. Zhao Jingai Li Rango Jianzheng Zai Ji Ganges Asang Si. Inconceivable, immeasurable. The number of grains of sand in the Ganges River was a number that was 10 orders of magnitude greater than Zhao. The numerous living beings were obviously very tightly organized. At this moment, there were 36 old men standing in front of Luo Fan. These 36 old men, like the countless other living beings, were also looking at Luo Fan with an incomparably fanatical gaze. That gaze, that expression, if they were to be classified by believers, they would definitely be above the level of fanatics and might even be existences at the level of holy spirits. When all of them saw Luo Fan suddenly shrink from his boundlessly tall appearance to his current appearance of the same size as them, they could not maintain their calm at all. Everyone knelt at the same time. They prostrated on the ground and kowtowed to Luo Fan again. "Welcome, Lord God." If Luo Fan wanted to enjoy the feeling of being worshipped by others, he could enjoy it almost every moment. As long as he moved casually, he could naturally create countless worlds and countless living beings to worship him. Therefore, facing this unknown number of living beings worshiping him at this moment, he appeared extremely calm. He said indifferently, "Dispense with the formalities. All of you, stand up and speak. I have something to ask all of you." As soon as his voice left his mouth, the entire world began to undergo a miraculous change. All the living beings heard his voice in an instant. Moreover, in the sky above, the originally normal sky was suddenly filled with endless rays of light. These lights were of various colors, and they combined to form an incomparably beautiful, majestic, and holy appearance that shook the entire world. It caused all the living beings in this world to naturally feel an indescribable sense of reverence and an indescribable joy. This phenomenon disappeared extremely slowly. It was not like other phenomena, which disappeared in an instant. Instead, it existed for a long time. It was as if it was about to turn into the normal scenery of this world. Yes, hearing Luo Fan's words, the countless living beings in the surroundings no longer had any doubts about Luo Fan's Lord God nature. They shouted in unison and stood up in a fanatical manner. As soon as all of them responded, Luo Fan vaguely received endless information. This information included information about the structure of this world civilization, why countless people regarded him as a Lord God, and why they had summoned him to descend, and so on and so forth. Almost all the information he wanted to know. The source of this information was completely random. It was as if it had existed in his heart for a long time, but he had not revealed it in the past. He did not know why it was suddenly revealed this time. However, Luo Fan did not pay too much attention to such an obviously inconceivable fact. At this moment, he was fully immersed in the information. So that's how it is. Although this world was a world with a round sky and a square earth, its surface area was boundless. However, its surface area was boundlessly vast. It was unknown how many billions of light years it covered. In such a world, the differences in topography were extremely strange. The main body of this world was land. Although there was also an ocean, it was not like other worlds, where the ocean enveloped the land. Instead, it was the other way around. The land enveloped the ocean. The entire world had countless, boundless oceans. The area of the oceans might even occupy 1/3 of the entire world's area. There were all sorts of strange terrains on the land, and the living beings that were born from it were endless. No matter how powerful or intelligent the people in this world were, they would not be able to distinguish them. They would not even know the number of living beings that were born in this world at any given moment. The living beings that were born in this vast world were different from other worlds, which were usually divided into many countries. In fact, there were no countries in this world at all. The living beings that were born in this world knew this as soon as they were born. They were born because of the legendary Lord God. They also knew that this world also existed because of the Lord God. Because they knew this information, the living beings in this world could not be separated from each other no matter how far apart they were. Their hearts were also closely connected. Therefore, even though the living beings in this world had countless battles and grudges, they did not have the thought of living independently from other living beings. In their hearts, they knew this very clearly. From a certain point of view, they and others, even if they were their enemies, even if they were existences that they wanted to scheme against until they died, were all companions. This situation had existed for an unknown period of time. It had always existed. For an unknown number of billions of years, all the living beings in this world have been following their instincts to enter and exit this world. They brought all kinds of materials that belonged to this world to other worlds and interacted with the living beings in other worlds. They would trade with them and bring more materials to strengthen this world so that their homeland would continue to grow and improve. However, this situation changed several hundred years ago. On a certain day, several hundred years ago, all of a sudden, half of the living beings in this world discovered that they had lost the ability to enter and exit this world. Their instincts, however, they told them that this was a good thing. This caused the living beings who had lost the ability to enter and exit this world to feel somewhat at a loss. Because of this change, although there were all kinds of grudges and schemes between the living beings in this world, for the first time, the countless living beings who fought against each other split up. Those living beings who had not experienced this change regarded themselves as the orthodox of this world and began to look down on the living beings who had lost the ability to enter and exit this world. As for those living beings who had lost their ability, they instinctively felt that the living beings who entered and exited this world and traded with other worlds were the ones who had betrayed this world and were the ones who were destroying the foundation of this world. This situation became more and more intense as time passed. In the beginning, It was just that they could not stand the sight of each other and had less and less contact with each other. However, as time passed, the dislike between the two sides gradually turned into resentment and hatred. Some conflicts between the two sides that were originally impossible to appear gradually began to appear. Because the time of the split was not long enough, these conflicts were still within a controllable range and had not really developed to the point of a real large-scale war. However, based on the current trend, the final large-scale war was almost inevitable. There were so many living beings in this world. Even if there was only one in a billion who was slightly smarter than the others, there were still countless smart people. Among these smart people, there was only one in a billion who was slightly smarter than the others, and there were still countless people who were smarter than the others, given the number of living beings in this world. This cycle could almost be repeated countless times. Therefore, there were definitely extremely intelligent living beings in this world who could see through the dangers and think of solutions. The 36 old men in front of Luo Fan were such living beings. They belonged to two camps. Among them, 18 belonged to the living beings who were still constantly entering and exiting this world and trading with other worlds. The remaining 18 belonged to the camp of living beings who had suddenly changed hundreds of years ago and lost this ability to enter and exit this world. As extremely intelligent beings who could see the dangers and think of solutions, the 36 old men naturally had enough rationality to control their emotions. Therefore, they abandoned the enmity between the two factions and discussed a mutually acceptable solution to the crisis that the world was facing. The solution was very simple. It was to gather the thoughts of most living beings in this world and summon the Master God who allowed this world to exist and give birth to all living beings. The Master God would use his supreme ability to resolve the crisis that this world was facing at this moment. As for the method to summon the Master God, it was needless to say. How could an endless number of living beings not be able to create such an exquisite method to achieve this? After understanding the reason why he came to this world, Luo Fan sighed. Back then, I actually severed a portion of the karma in my luck path, but it actually resulted in this outcome. The saying that the world is unpredictable is not a lie. Back then, he simply wanted to sever the connection between himself and the river of luck path, because he really could not sever it completely. He could only do his best to sever as much of his luck path as possible, which resulted in a portion of his luck path being severed. This also resulted in the countless living beings in this world that corresponded to the river of luck path at this moment. There was no doubt about this. Through the information that he suddenly received, Luo Fan clearly remembered it. The time when those living beings changed was the instant when he used the second level of the law of karma to sever his luck path. Not only did the timing match, but the logic behind it also matched. After he used the second level of the law of karma to sever his luck path, he discovered that the corresponding point in the river of luck path had become much dimmer than before. At first, he only thought that it was an inevitable change, but after discovering that the small point was actually an extremely complete world, he understood. How was it an inevitable change? It was clearly because he severed the karma connection, causing almost half of the living beings to change and no longer enter and exit this world, causing the material exchange between this world and other worlds to weaken by almost half. The corresponding point in the river of luck path for living beings was a world. The reason why the world would emit light was naturally because the world's power leaked out, making it seem like it was glowing in the outside world. If the material exchange with the outside world decreased, the frequency of living beings entering and exiting would decrease. The leakage of power would naturally decrease, and it was only natural that the light would dim. After thinking about all of this, Luo Fan could not help but feel a little scared. Fortunately, these living beings had thought of summoning him. Otherwise, when the conflict between the two factions in this world accumulated to the limit in the future, it would start an endless war and all the living beings would be wiped out. To him, that would be a disaster with an unpredictable outcome. For this world, Luo Fan could only sense things that had happened in the past few years. It could be said that he was extremely unfamiliar with this world. He did not know what would happen if all the living beings in this world completely disappeared. However, he instinctively knew that it would definitely be a disaster that could not be dealt with, and could even affect his life. "You did well to know to summon me," Luo Fan said calmly, as he said that the phenomenon that had already weakened in this world surged again, making the entire world even more sacred, more majestic, more wonderful. Moreover, because of what he said, all the living beings in this world were naturally filled with indescribable joy. In fact, some living beings could not handle this surprise. They directly fainted on the ground, their faces full of blissful smiles, and they lost all perception of the outside world. To be able to serve the Lord God is our lifelong pursuit. The 36 old men who were closest to Luo Fan said enthusiastically at this moment. Luo Fan smiled slightly. This smile made the colors of the entire world become more vivid. At this moment, Luo Fan also realized that all of his actions could cause so many incredible phenomena in this world was not because he was the creator of this world, nor was it because he could control the entire world and change it according to his will. It was because this was the will of all living beings. The number of living beings in this world had even exceeded the limit of what could be described with numbers. And all of these living beings thought that Luo Fan was the creator of this world, and they all thought that Luo Fan was the supreme ruler of this world. The will of one person did not have too much power, and it could not even affect reality. However, the will of thousands of people was already powerful enough to push an ordinary living being to the point of achieving immortality. Chapter 1402. Countless living beings felt that Luo Fan was the supreme and omnipotent supreme god. Then, Luo Fan in this world naturally had all the powers that a supreme god should have. Thus, in this world, he naturally had all the powers that a supreme god should have. This kind of power that could change the world with his words, and change his thoughts, and change the world was naturally almost an ability that he had instinctively. Luo Fan also had a headache regarding the crisis that the world was facing. In this world, he had absolute prestige. It was not difficult for him to unify the opinions of all living beings, or even to make all living beings lose the ability to travel to other worlds and communicate with other worlds. However, this method was only treating the symptoms and not the root cause. Now that the opinions of these living beings were unified, this world was still giving birth to living beings every moment. These newly born living beings would not be completely unified by Luo Fan like the current living beings. They would still follow their instinctive inclinations. This way, it was fine if there were only a few of them. Because they were weak, they would naturally pretend to have the same opinion as the existing living beings. However, as time continued to pass, when a number of existing living beings gradually decreased and the number of newly born living beings increased, the power balance between the two parties was finally balanced again. At that time, the crisis that the world was facing at this moment would definitely appear again. Moreover, because they had been suppressed for too long, it might cause conflicts to deepen, and an even more shocking and terrifying war would occur, causing more losses to the living beings in this world. This would cause more damage to the world. Therefore, it was impossible to directly use the infinite power that he possessed to unify the opinions of all living beings. After figuring out the pros and cons, Luo Fan also knew how to cure these different opinions. That was to directly change the nature of this world, so that the living beings born in this world would no longer have the ability to leave this world. They could only survive in this world, cultivate in this world, and grow in this world. This was the only way. This was the only way to avoid the crisis that this world was facing at this moment forever. This was the only way to prevent all living beings in this world from having a chance to cause a war that involved all living beings in this world. However, it was a pity that if Luo Fan could achieve that, it would practically be equivalent to severing the connection between his luck and the River of Luck. It would be equivalent to breaking free from the control of the River of Luck. He had obtained the true freedom that he now knew. Obviously, with Luo Fan's current ability, with his current cultivation base, and his current understanding of the River of Luck Dao, how could he do this? Although the will of all living beings gathered together was unbelievably powerful. But to push Luo Fan's power to a level that was comparable to that of a saint, that was obviously impossible. We need to establish an orderly fighting mechanism so that the conflict between the two factions can be continuously whittled away under such a fighting mechanism and finally be maintained within an acceptable range. Luo Fan wasn't an ordinary person, so he quickly thought of a solution. Fighting was absolutely unavoidable in this world. To limit the scale of the fighting to a certain aspect, to a certain level, that was the true wisdom. This thought flashed through his mind, and based on this idea, countless specific plans and ideas began to emerge in his mind. Soon, Luo Fan chose the one that seemed to be the most feasible and had the least loss. This world was so vast, and there were so many living beings in it. This method must be extremely adaptable. It must be able to solve all the fighting, be acceptable to everyone, and be able to minimize the loss. It was imaginable how difficult it was. Luo Fan had traveled to an unknown number of trillions of worlds, and the civilizations he had seen were even more numerous. Among those endless civilizations, he could almost find a corresponding world that could implement his ideas, if he had any ideas. Therefore, to find a solution to this kind of conflict, it was not just an idea. It was also a method that could be implemented in a certain world. To solve this problem, it could be said to be difficult, but it could also be said to be simple. That was sports. Of course, this kind of sports could not be ordinary sports like basketball or football. It needed to be more exciting and difficult. In Luo Fan's memory, there was such a sports activity. It was a fighting game. The rules of this kind of fighting game were extremely strict. The punishment for losing was the direct deprivation of one's memories and strength. If this kind of game was in an ordinary civilization, it would definitely be a horrifying game that was enough to make everyone afraid. However, in this world where a super large-scale war was about to break out, using this kind of game to replace the upcoming war was obviously many times better. After choosing the project, the next thing to do was naturally to make all living beings in this world that existed now and would be born in the future unable to go beyond the limits of this game. This was almost impossible for ordinary people. Even for ordinary cultivators, it was an incredible miracle. However, for Luo Fan, who now had almost omnipotent power in this world, this was an extremely easy thing to do. With a thought, the rules and regulations of this entire world would naturally change. A layer of virtual network was naturally born from this layer of rules and regulations. It began to make the situation of this entire world undergo some extremely subtle changes. This network of nothingness was none other than the battle network. A virtual network that did not rely on any physical objects, but only relied on this world and the rules and regulations of this world. This was the greatest function of the network itself. It was to connect the consciousness of all living beings in this world, regardless of whether they existed now or were about to be born in the future. As a result, all living beings were equivalent to a terminal in this combat network, causing the consciousness of all living beings to appear to be connected at an even higher level. The moment this vast and boundless combat network appeared, all living beings that existed in this world that almost surpassed the limits of what could be described by numbers instantly felt its existence. In a trance, all of them had entered a strange, independent space. This was a space in its most primitive state. It was a grayish haze, a large egg that could only contain their existence. The existence of this large egg caused every living being that entered this combat network to feel incomparably sullen, incomparably vexed. Almost instinctively, they wanted to break the limits of this egg. Instinctively, they wanted to break this egg. And after this egg was broken, it formed a space, one that was based on the spiritual characteristics of every living being. Physical characteristics, personality, and many other factors that formed a space. This way, the space formed by every living being. It was completely different from any other living being's space. Every living being's space had their own unique characteristics. Those densely packed, infinite spaces that surpassed the limits of what could be described by numbers were piled together. This caused this combat network to form a vast world that was millions and millions of times larger than this real world. A boundless and vast world formed by countless tiny spaces. The moment their respective spaces were born, all living beings that entered the combat network with their consciousness instantly received the information that Luo Fan had left in this combat network. Everyone instantly knew the use of this combat network. The consciousness of every living being was tightly connected to this combat network. This combat network was incomparably mysterious. As long as any two living beings wanted to fight, the combat network would naturally connect their spaces together. All of their consciousnesses would be completely pulled into that space, and they would begin to fight on a fair field. If the battle was won, not only would that space devour 90% of the loser's space, but could also erase a certain period of the loser's memories at will according to the advantage of victory. The greater the advantage, the greater the amount of memories that could be erased, and the extent to which an individual's space could grow also had an extremely large limit. After growing to 10 million times the size of their normal space, it could no longer continue to grow and be permanently fixed. At that time, if they fought with other living beings and won, they could only erase their opponent's memories. As for the opponent's space, they would no longer be able to devour it. If they forcefully tried to devour it, it might even cause a backlash and cause their own space to collapse instead. After understanding the changes of this combat network, all the living beings in this world instantly understood the meaning of this combat network's existence. In an instant, the 36 old men closest to Luo Fan understood the benefits of this change. In an instant, their respect for Luo Fan increased, and they became even more fanatical. Almost in the instant that they came back to their senses, they knelt on the ground at the first instant. Endless words of praise swarmed towards Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan did not pay much attention to them at this moment. His eyes pierced through the void, directly looking at the endless space that existed within the combat network. And with his own thoughts, he slightly adjusted the combat network, making the connection between the combat network and the rules and laws even tighter, making its relationship with this world even more difficult to separate and isolate. As something that had just been born, it was obviously impossible for it to become incomparably perfect in an instant. Without enough adjustments, without spending enough energy to improve it, there would definitely be many oversights. It was the same for this combat network. Even if it was created by Luo Fan, even if it was one with this entire world and could not be separated, it was still impossible to change this fundamental law. This combat network also had many oversights that he could not have imagined before it was created. Some of these oversights might not be important and would not have much impact on the existence of the entire combat network. However, there were also some extremely huge oversights that could even affect the existence of the entire combat network, enough to destroy the entire combat network in a single day. Just like at this very moment, this combat network had only existed for a few dozen breaths of time, and Luo Fan had already adjusted who knew how many millions of oversights, or perhaps the legendary bugs. Instead, it caused the perfection of the entire battle net to rise by several notches. As the Supreme Divine Master, Luo Fan naturally did not need to explain anything to these living beings. He did not want to speak. With a thought, his figure naturally disappeared before everyone's eyes. Although he was still standing where he was, there was no longer any living being that could see his existence. As an omnipotent, supreme existence, especially this kind of omnipotence, this kind of supreme power was something that came from the will of all living beings. It was something that needed to be maintained the most. It was not something else. It was the sense of mystery. Only by maintaining a sufficient sense of mystery could it make those living beings continue to think that he was omnipotent, that he was supreme. and only by doing so could it make his omnipotent, supreme concept even more deeply engraved in the hearts of all living beings. As for the current Luo fan, he would do his best to reduce his contact with those living beings. This was his method of maintaining his sense of mystery. As expected, after Luo Fan disappeared before everyone's eyes, the living beings in this world did not feel that anything was wrong. Not a single one of them thought that Luo Fan needed to say anything to them before he could leave. On the contrary, instead, everyone was even more certain that Luo Fan was the supreme divine master. They all left the battle network and kowtowed to the position where Luo Fan was at the center. They repeatedly said, "Farewell, divine master." Luo Fan naturally didn't care about them. Feeling his increasingly powerful might in this world, he just smiled and began to carefully observe the battle network. Bit by bit, he adjusted the various aspects of the battle network and eliminated some of the bugs that were discovered one after another. After all, the number of living beings that came to welcome the arrival of Luo Fan was innumerable, and they even belonged to two camps. After discovering that Luo Fan had really left, the originally harmonious scene instantly changed, and in the blink of an eye, it became extremely tense. Even the 36 old men who were the closest to Luo Fan previously also became tense at this moment. They observed each other and were on guard against each other. It was as if they were picking their own opponents, but at the same time, they were guarding against being regarded as opponents by others. Even they, who were wise and far-sighted, were like this. It was easy to imagine what the other living beings who were far inferior to them were like. In the blink of an eye, the endless space of the battle network was connected to each other by an unknown number of trillions, forming an unknown number of trillions of battlefields. Such a huge number of battles occurred at the same time. If it was any other network, even if it was a virtual network with a planet as the core, or even a galaxy as the carrier, it would definitely be unable to withstand such a huge number of calculations and completely collapse in an instant. But here, in this vast world whose surface area was measured in trillions of light years, there were many things that were different. Such a large number of calculations did not put any pressure on the battle network at all. Not to mention collapsing, it couldn't even cause more bugs to appear in the battle net. The first wave of battles on the battle network quickly ended. In the instant it ended, it was unknown how many living beings in this world suddenly fell to the ground and fell unconscious. This was the appearance of 90% of the space being devoured and a portion of their memories being erased. At the same time, in the battle network, the trillions of spaces that were connected to each other began to separate at this moment. However, when they were connected before, the size of the spaces were about the same. Now that they were separated again, the difference between the two realms had become nearly 20 times greater. Those living beings who had obtained victory left the battle network. For a moment, they saw their previous opponents lying on the ground around them. The previous battles were incomparably intense. Naturally, there were people who held grudges against their opponents even though they had won. When they saw their opponents lying in front of them without any ability to resist, evil thoughts rose in their hearts. Countless victorious living beings gathered their strength and pounced towards their opponents who had fainted on the ground. They wanted to take advantage of the fact that their opponents could not resist to get close to them and erase them. Luo Fan was naturally shocked by such a situation that could be easily deduced. He was already prepared for it. After those living beings whose memories had been erased fainted, they were all under the protection of the battle network and all the living beings who were connected to it. Under such circumstances, it would be fine if those living beings did not pounce forward. The moment they did, they would suffer the backlash of the battle network and the countless living beings. All of their powers were of the same magnitude. They would retaliate in the same way. In an instant, those who did not attack harshly were naturally fine. At most, they were only injured. However, those who wanted to kill their opponents with the first move were in trouble. In the blink of an eye, countless beings were killed by the rebound force. Because of this action, the number of living beings in this world had almost surpassed the limit of numbers. Even if only a small portion of them had evil thoughts when they saw their opponents unconscious on the ground, the absolute number added up was already a shocking and terrifying number. Even among the living beings with evil intentions, there was no one who could resist them. Only a very small portion of them wanted to kill their opponents with one move, but were completely erased by the backlash. The absolute number added up to tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of living beings. In other words, in that instant of change just now, at least tens of billions of living beings in this world had died. Although this casualty rate was not comparable to a large-scale war between all the living beings in this world. However, it was definitely not considered small. At the moment when all the living beings died, Luo Fan felt the luck Dao in his body tremble slightly. An indescribable feeling of awkwardness was transmitted from the luck Dao to his heart, making him feel at this instant that his luck Dao had already suffered some kind of damage. At this moment, he felt that his luck Dao had already suffered some kind of damage. So, this is the result of these living beings dying on a large scale. Luo Fan was even more afraid at this moment. What he was afraid of was that if he had not been summoned into this world back then, wouldn't he have suffered even greater misfortune when a large-scale war broke out in this world in the future, when all the living beings in this world died to the point where none of them were left? However, even though his luck Dao had suffered some damage from the deaths of tens of billions of living beings, Luo Fan still did not regret it all. Although the number of these living beings was already extremely high, but was a process that was bound to happen. If he had told the living beings in this world that they could not attack those unconscious living beings, their impression would definitely not be as deep as their personal experience in witnessing this result. If they did not have a deep impression, they would think that they were lucky. In the future, there would be even more living beings who would try this, and when those living beings tried it, it would naturally bring about endless deaths at that time. It would seem that there were fewer people dying each time, but in the long run, the number of living beings dying would instead be countless times higher than the current number of tens of billions or even hundreds of billions. In comparison, it was clearly better to not say anything now and let those living beings personally experience this result. Even if there were endless living beings in this world, and the number even surpassed the limit that could be described by numbers. But no matter what, tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of living beings were not a small number. Luo Fan believed that any creature would have an incomparably deep impression of this matter after learning about this number. They would remember the rule that the person who had their memories erased and was unconscious on the ground couldn't attack. It was incomparably clear and incomparably deep. Sure enough, at this time, those creatures who had watched helplessly as someone rushed forward to kill the figure that had already failed and could only lie on the ground were directly smashed into pieces. They were killed using the same move and the same amount of strength. In an instant, they were all stunned, and the rules set by Luo Fan were incomparably deeply engraved in their hearts. In fact, they even made up their minds to pass this rule down so that their descendants and their descendants would deeply remember this rule. Of course, at this moment, they did not have the chance to think too much. Those living beings did not exist independently. Each of them had their own family and their own good friends. Those living beings who had lost and fainted naturally had many people who felt injustice for them and wanted to take revenge for them. Therefore, those living beings who had won were very quickly pulled back into the battle network. Their own space was once again connected to the space of others, and a new round of battle began. True battle strength, naturally, had little to do with the size of the space in the battle network. However, the battle prowess in the combat network was closely related to the size of the space. Although the victors had already fought once, and had yet to completely recover from the previous battle, because they had devoured the space of the losers, their battle prowess had greatly increased, directly counteracting the disadvantage of their bodies not completely recovering. In comparison, the following battles were similarly not unfair, nor was it as one-sided as those who had not participated in the battles imagined. Chapter 14:03. As the duration of the BattleNet's operation continued, More and more bugs that Luo Fan hadn't thought of were revealed. This had long been within Luo Fan's expectations, and he wasn't surprised at all. He had spent a good few years in this world, getting rid of these more and more bugs, doing his best to make this battle net into a perfect state. The results of such hard work caused the battle net to finally not have any more flaws after being operated in this world for so many years. The way it operated also became more and more perfect. Having reached this stage of the battle net, it had already given Luo Fan enough confidence to believe that this battle net would be able to exist for a long time. It was possible that for a very long time to come, the large-scale war that had originally been on the verge of erupting in this world would not erupt for a very long time. After several large-scale tests, he discovered that this battle net had indeed become incomparably stable and complete. Only then did Luo Fan finally relax. This way, it should be able to last until I find a way to completely sever the connection between luck and the river of luck in the future. Luo Fan thought to himself, the light in his eyes becoming distant. After getting rid of this dangerous situation that concerned his very foundation, he once again remembered the reason why he had entered this world. With a thought, his figure had already arrived at the highest point of this world, looking down at the entire world. The miracles he had performed in this world still had an effect on the entire world, and all living beings treated him as the will of the Supreme Divine Master. Naturally, it was still extremely strong. And with such a will, Luo Fan was still almost omnipotent in this world, almost omniscient. Under such circumstances, even though the entire world was hundreds of millions of light years wide, he was able to see everything in the entire world with a single glance. In an instant, he was able to find all the matter that existed in this world that belonged to other worlds. Once he found them, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. This entire world was made up of substances that belonged to this world itself. But it didn't even take up 1% apart from this 1% of substances. The other 99% of substances all came from other worlds. That ratio is actually so large. The scene in front of him was completely beyond his expectations. Originally, he had thought that this world was so vast compared to the numerous living beings, and that the number of living beings was greater. It was the substances that constantly exchanged with other worlds. In the end, the substances that were exchanged could make up to 1%. That was already an exaggeration. This 99% of foreign substances were constantly being transmitted over, acting on his world. This caused his world to suffer an incomparably heavy resistance, causing this world to be fixed in this position on the river of luck, unable to break free, unable to be free. Of this 99% of foreign substances, as much as 0.1% belonged to substances that had been transmitted over from the corresponding worlds. This seemed to be an extremely small number. But don't forget that all the foreign matter in Luo Fan's world was the result of Luo Fan's countless life forms constantly communicating with the endless worlds above the river of luck for trillions of years. Under such circumstances, the corresponding worlds of Luo Fan's world could actually increase the ratio to 0.1%, which was more than 1,000,000,000,000 times higher than the average. Under such circumstances, the corresponding worlds of the corresponding worlds could actually increase the ratio to 0.1%, which was more than 1,000,000,000,000 times higher than the average. Looking at it from this angle, one could imagine how huge this number was. There's actually so much. Let me see what's so special about these substances here. As Luo Fan thought to himself, the divine light in his eyes gradually faded. In this entire world, everything that belonged to other worlds, and even the infinite substances that originally belonged to this world, disappeared in an instant. In his eyes, only the substances that had come from the corresponding worlds of the corresponding worlds of the corresponding worlds were left. Although it was only 0.1% of the substances, just the amount of these substances was actually enough to form a world. The distribution of these substances seemed to be messy and disorderly. They seemed to randomly appear in his vast and boundless world. Luo Fan carefully observed for a while, but he was confused. He couldn't see what was special about it, so he couldn't help but frown deeply. Could it be that the secret isn't here? Luo Fan frowned as he thought. However, very soon, he overturned this thought in his mind. Because that was impossible. If the reason wasn't here, then why would the substances of these two worlds actually interact in such a huge amount and so frequently? There must be a secret that he didn't know about. After figuring this out, Luo Fan continued to analyze the distribution and composition of these substances. However, this time, he began to gradually add other substances that existed in this world. He placed these substances in their original positions, and through the interaction between these substances and the surrounding environment, he deduced the mysteries of these substances, deduced how these substances would affect this world, and how their luck path would be suppressed by Kai Floater's luck path. This process wasn't simple at all. Even if it was Luo Fan doing it, it still took him a few months to complete it. Compared to before, this time, Luo Fan gained a lot. Among these substances, most of them were ineffective. Just like the substances from other worlds, they only allowed these substances to produce a force with their original world, causing Luo Fan's world to be fixed in this region of the luck path, unable to transcend, unable to be free. However, a small part of them, because of the combination with the surrounding substances, finally outlined a strange, broken formation in this world. Luo Fan had never seen this formation before, but he could see the purpose of this formation at a glance. The purpose of this formation, it was to extract the power of this world to strengthen itself. Through its own strengthening, it would affect the rules and laws of this world, causing some kind of increasingly obvious change. This change was to cause this world to resonate with the corresponding world of Kai Floater. Then, through this resonance, the power would be transmitted to that world. So, it's like this. Kai Floater. After discovering the purpose of this formation, Luo Fan's expression became extremely ugly. That formation was very magical. Now that it was so broken, it actually produced such an obvious effect of luck path suppression. If it became complete in the future, how terrifying would the effect be? At that time, wouldn't he become the kind of person in novels who specialized in giving treasures to the main character, giving women, or even becoming the kind of absolute supporting character who wholeheartedly sought benefits for Kai Floater? At the thought of this, Luo Fan's anger grew even stronger. Luo Fan thought in his heart, "Since you dare to plot against me, then don't blame me." Then, he raised his hand and waved. In an instant, the whole world shook. All the substances from the corresponding world of Kai Floater instantly left their original places and soared into the sky. Under Luo Fan's feet, a vast and boundless continent was formed. When the countless substances left the ground and rose into the sky, the entire world's rules and laws began to violently surge and fluctuate like waves in the sea. This surging lasted for a long time before disappearing. After these changes subsided, this world seemed to have undergone some sort of change. However, if one sensed it carefully, there seemed to be no change at all. It was rather strange. For Luo Fan, such a change was naturally not something that could be concealed. In an instant, Luo Fan clearly sensed what exactly had happened. He couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. He could clearly feel that the feeling of his luck path being suppressed by Kai Floater had completely disappeared. In other words, at least for now, Luo Fan's luck path had regained its freedom. When this change occurred in Luo Fan's cave abode, in the world where Kai Floater was participating in the test, Kai Floater, who was participating in the test in the fourth world, suddenly had an extremely strange feeling. It was as if the feeling that he would definitely pass the test that he had been feeling since he started participating in the test had suddenly disappeared. Even the existence in the fourth world that he felt close to seemed to have an additional layer of barrier. It was as if there was a layer of strange obstruction between them. What's wrong? Why would there suddenly be such a change? Kai Floater was secretly shocked. Could it be that Senior Luo Zun suddenly changed the difficulty of the test? Kai Floater didn't feel anything about his luck path suppressing Luo Fan's luck path. He didn't know that this was a situation that his luck path might encounter. At this moment, Kai Floater was many times stronger than when he first met Luo Fan. However, even so, he was only a pseudo-saint level 8. He had not become a pseudo-saint level 9. In the second world that Luo Fan had set up, Kai Floater had comprehended the cultivation direction of the space-time Tao in the wormhole at the last moment and saw the path to become a pseudo-saint level 9. However, because the barrier between level 8 and level 9 was too huge and tough, even if he saw the path and direction, he couldn't break through so quickly. He could only wait for a long time to cultivate and accumulate himself bit by bit in the future. Only then would he be able to advance to the level of a pseudo-saint level 9. In the test of the fourth world, Kai Floater had originally found the direction to pass this test and was even halfway there. However, at this moment, he realized that this path seemed to be wrong. At the end of this path was not the door to the next world, nor was it the final exit to pass the test. It was a dead end. Kai Floater felt annoyed when he realized this. The feeling that Luo Fan had increased the difficulty of the test appeared once again. Under this feeling, he became even more annoyed. Although he suddenly could not find a way to pass through this world, he was still very confident about passing through the fourth world. Actually, Kai Floater was still very confident. Therefore, his annoyance was not because of the test of this world, but because of the next test. In his opinion, Luo Fan must be dissatisfied with him for suddenly increasing the difficulty of the test. Since Luo Fan was dissatisfied, the next test would only become more and more difficult, and his chances of passing the final test would become smaller and smaller. How could Kai Floater not feel annoyed after struggling for such a long time? Forget it. No matter what, as long as I make enough progress in this test, it doesn't matter even if I fail the test. Even, perhaps after this test, I'll directly become a pseudo-saint level 9. I'll be able to participate in the Tao discussion meeting and the treasure-seizing meet, and I won't have to rely on Luo Zun anymore. With this thought in mind, Kai Floater's expression became firm again. Of course, Luo Fan did not know that Kai Floater had gone through such a mental struggle in the many universes he had opened up. At this moment, he looked at the vast land under his feet, and countless thoughts were running through his mind. These substances in his world had changed in the corresponding world of Kai Floater. Therefore, if Luo Fan let go of these substances, they would use various methods to return to their original positions in the following time and reform the broken formation. This was obviously unacceptable to Luo Fan. Finally, the seemingly simple and reasonable method of throwing these substances out was also not a good choice. Not only might this cause damage to this world, but it would also cause him to be affected by something that he still did not know, but it must exist. Moreover, the substances that were transmitted from the corresponding world of Kai Floater would reappear in the place where the formation should be, and the formation would be set up again. In this way, if he threw these substances away, it would only delay the formation of the formation a little. What was the point of that? Luo Fan racked his brain, carefully thinking about how to solve this problem. At a certain moment, Luo Fan suddenly patted his head, secretly cursing himself for being stupid. Since these substances come from another world, I can use the power of this world to completely digest them and completely turn them into resources for the growth of this world's own substances. Isn't that enough? Moreover, not only these substances from Kai Floater's world, but all other substances from other worlds can also be dealt with in this way. In this way, not only can I solve the hidden danger, but I can also eliminate the pulling force of other worlds on this world. Perhaps I can even let this world leave the long river of luck. After thinking this through, Luo Fan no longer hesitated. With a thought, countless mysterious and unfathomable principles slowly flowed through his mind. All kinds of god powers and dharma arts were rapidly born in his mind. These god powers and dharma arts all used the world as the main body. They targeted the god powers and dharma arts that could transform the substances from other worlds into resources for the growth of this world itself. No matter which one of these god powers and dharma arts it was, they were extremely mysterious, enough to make all cultivators abandon everything. But for Luo Fan, he was rather dissatisfied with these god powers and dharma arts. This was because if he digested those substances according to any of these dharma arts or god powers, it would take who knows how many billions of years to completely digest all the substances in this world. Even the substances that came from the corresponding world of Kai Floater's world might take billions of years to completely digest. How could Luo Fan have the time to wait like this for such a long time? In an instant, Luo Fan directly scattered these god powers and dharma arts and started to use them as a foundation to create a second time. Not long after, he created 10 times fewer mystical abilities and dharma arts than before. What he had obtained this time was 100 times better than what he had obtained before. The time spent would also be reduced by 100 times. However, it would still take billions of years to completely transform all the foreign substances in this world. Obviously, this was not something that Luo Fan was willing to accept. In an instant, Luo Fan scattered these god powers and dharma arts again and continued to create on this foundation. He did this again and again, until he repeated it thousands of times. The original god powers and dharma arts were reduced to 3 god powers and 2 dharma arts. Only then did Luo Fan finally stop. It was not because he was satisfied with this result. It was because these god powers and dharma arts had been raised to the limit. They had reached the peak of his ability at this moment. It would still take thousands of years for these god powers and dharma arts to completely transform all the foreign substances in the world of Kai Floater's world. And to completely transform all the foreign substances in this world, it would take tens of millions of years. This time was still extremely long, and it still made Luo Fan quite dissatisfied. However, this was the limit, even if it was Luo Fan. But it was impossible to surpass this fundamental limit. Therefore, Luo Fan could only accept this fact helplessly. Fortunately, this time, compared to the process that originally needed billions of years, was already within the range that Luo Fan could accept. But it was not a bad result. At this time, several years had passed again, and among the world clusters that Luo Fan had opened up, Kai Floater, who was taking the test, had already passed thousands of years. But, compared to the smoothness he had experienced in the past, this time he was still stuck in the 4th world. Compared to before, although he had made a lot of progress, he still hadn't found a way to break through that world. Moreover, not only that, Kai Fu Zi had not made any progress in all these years. He was unable to comprehend any of the mysteries from that world that would be of use to him. This kind of experience, compared to the past, was simply a world of difference, causing Kai Floater's mood to become even more irritated. There were almost a few times when he couldn't help but open his mouth to give up. Although he had persevered at the last moment every time, it had already made him so irritated that he couldn't control himself. In the long river of luck, the exchanges between any 2 worlds weren't simultaneous, and they weren't even equal. In other words, although there were countless creatures leaving their own worlds to exchange materials in other worlds, it didn't mean that there would also be creatures returning to that world. For example, although there were countless exchanges between Luo Fan's world and Kai Floater's corresponding world, only the creatures in Luo Fan's world would enter Kai Floater's corresponding world. However, none of the creatures in Kai Floater's corresponding world stepped into this world. Of course, many creatures in other worlds would naturally enter and exit Luo Fan's world to exchange materials with Luo Fan's world. This was unavoidable. Because of this, the initiative of this world exchange was in Luo Fan's hands. With a move of Luo Fan's heart, the billions of creatures that were exchanging material between the world of Kai Fu Zi and his world received the oracle of the Supreme Lord. In an instant, they knew that the materials they exchanged should be placed in some special places and not directly offered to the world like before. After receiving such an oracle, those creatures were so moved that tears streamed down their cheeks. The God Master had actually given them an oracle directly. How lucky and benevolent was this? With such an attitude, not to mention the fact that Luo Fan did not stop them from exchanging materials with other worlds, even if he wanted them to stop going out stop exchanging materials, and join another faction living in this world, they would still be willing to do so. At this moment, there was a continuous stream of matter being sent to each of Luo Fan's chosen techniques that needed to be dealt with in this world. Not long after, the materials piled up like a mountain, meeting the requirements of Luo Fan's spell. There would always be a difference in priorities. Even if Luo Fan's ultimate goal was to completely convert all the materials in this world that were foreign. But now, the most important thing was still the materials from Kai Floater's world. Therefore, the spell that Luo Fan cast naturally used the materials from Kai Floater's world as the main body. Facing the materials that belonged to Kai Floater's world that formed a huge three-dimensional seal, Luo Fan's thoughts moved, and the laws of this world naturally produced all sorts of subtle changes. Chapter 1404. Each node of this huge 3D talisman used very little matter. Therefore, even though many living beings had only placed those matter for a short period of time, and not many living beings had placed them. However, after the accumulation, the size of this 3D talisman was enough to cover the entire world. It contained almost all the space and regions of this world. Its vastness even overlapped with this world itself. This 3D talisman shone in this world. Instantly, like a black hole, it sucked in all the matter that came from Kai Fuzi's world and poured them into the 3D talisman. They were continuously washed, broken, and reassembled in the endless brilliance. Every time it was washed, every time it was scattered, and every time it was recombined, these substances would be reduced a little. At the same time, in a certain part of the world, the original matter of this world, which had originally been left with only 1%, increased by a tiny bit. This was the result of the 3D talisman using some mysterious and indescribable method to turn these matter into the growth resources of this world itself. Just like that, the cycle repeated itself over and over again, gradually turning those substances into resources for the growth of the world itself. Luo Fan looked at the scene in front of him with a faint smile on his face. At this moment, he felt an indescribable sense of relief from the bottom of his heart. This relief was as if he had thrown away some hidden danger, as if he had finally let go of the huge rock that had been pressing down on his heart. This feeling was not a feeling that he had felt because he had resolved a hidden danger. It was a feeling that came from Luo Fan's luck itself. Luck was an indescribably mysterious thing. It had a close connection with Luo Fan. It had reached an unimaginable level. Under such circumstances, all the changes that happened would naturally be transmitted to Luo Fan's life source, causing slight changes in his thoughts. This situation was clearly due to the changes in his own luck due to this world itself. Therefore, this feeling was naturally transmitted to him, which was why he felt so relaxed. Luo Fan had a deep understanding of his own mind. In an instant, he knew the source of this change. The huge 3D talisman speed of turning a specific matter into resources was extremely fast. Within the 3D talisman, the countless matter was instantly disintegrated. The light that it emitted did not stop. It even spread across the vast and boundless world, making it seem as if the entire world was shining with this light at all times. This scene caused all the creatures in this world to be inexplicably amazed and shocked. However, there had been countless changes in this world over the years. Even though it was such an inconceivable scene, they quickly accepted it. Very soon, they regarded this scene of the entire world flickering with light as the original normal scene of the world itself. It turned out that Luo Fan had already gathered the matter that originally belonged to Kai Fuzi's world under his feet, forming an extremely vast continent. Now, the operation of the 3D talisman was continuously absorbing and guiding the matter that belonged to Kai Fuzi's world into the 3D talisman to be converted. In this process, it was as if the continent under Luo Fan's feet was being pulled by an infinitely powerful force, falling from the sky. It turned into a huge tornado that kept entering the 3D talisman. This scene was quite shocking. Luo Fan looked at the changes in the 3D talisman and secretly measured the speed at which the matter was disappearing. He showed a satisfied expression. At this speed, in a few thousand years, all the matter that belonged to Kai Fuzi would be completely absorbed and turned into resources for the growth of the world itself. However, Luo Fan knew that this was only the first step. This was because the matter that formed the 3D talisman came from Kai Fuzi's world. It came from Kai Fuzi's world. So this three-dimensional talisman first targeted the matter from Kai Fuzi's world. In the future, when all the matter from Kai Fuzi's world was completely absorbed and digested, the 3D talisman would then absorb and convert the matter from other worlds, turning it into resources. This entire process was the result of the 3D talisman's own operation. It did not require Luo Fan to control it, nor did he need to enter this world again to reconstruct the 3D talisman. Understanding this, Luo Fan knew that he could leave this world. He thought, the hidden danger has been eliminated. Next, I should find out what caused this situation. He gazed into the distance, casting his gaze outside the world, towards the world that Kai Fuzi corresponded to. He entered this world that belonged to him because of the summoning of the living beings in this world. It was not something that he could do with his own ability. Evidently, the world that Kai Fuzi corresponded to did not summon him. It even faintly rejected him. With his current ability, it was impossible for him to enter it. However, if Luo Fan wanted to find out why the matter that Kai Fuzi had thrown into his world would form that formation and form the effect of luck suppression, he would have to go to that world to find out. Thinking of this contradiction, Luo Fan could not help but frown. Why don't I just kill him? Luo Fan suddenly felt an indescribable sense of irritation. The person he wanted to kill was naturally Kai Fuzi. No matter what the reason was, Kai Buozi's luck had suppressed him, causing him to involuntarily change his mentality and thoughts. For Luo Fan, this was already enough reason to kill him. As he thought of this, he suddenly discovered that his world had suddenly given birth to tens of millions of special living beings. These living beings were different from the living beings that had been born in this world. They did not belong to the two camps that had been born in this world. Instead, they belonged to a third camp, a camp that was more aggressive and invasive. At the same time, many creatures that originally belonged to the two camps in this world seemed to have undergone some subtle changes in an instant. They changed their original camps and formed the third camp. It was a camp that was full of aggression and invasive. These living beings that had entered the third camp had instinctively formed corresponding concepts and thoughts in their minds. They instinctively knew that their mission was to attack a certain world. They were going to completely destroy a certain world, regardless of whether it was the living beings that had the ability to enter and exit this world or the living beings that had lost this ability after entering the third camp. They all changed at the same time. At this moment, they all obtained a brand new ability, the ability to enter and exit this world. This brand new ability allowed them to enter and exit this world 100 times faster than ordinary living beings. Furthermore, they did not need to bring ordinary materials from this world to communicate with. Instead, they could directly create some weapons out of thin air and bring these weapons in and out of this world. As Luo Fan sensed this change, countless thoughts suddenly flashed through his mind. In the end, he came to a sudden realization. So, the legendary karma entangling one's body with a single thought was actually like this. Just now, he only had a murderous intent in his heart, and this world that corresponded to him had actually changed naturally. Naturally, it had already given birth to corresponding living beings that were targeted at his murderous intent. From the looks of it, any battle that he had appeared in back then, as long as it was targeted at living beings with the existence of luck path, this world would probably also experience the same change. It would also give birth to living beings to attack a certain luck path world. And if he won and defeated his opponent, it would naturally be the living beings that were born in this world that destroyed his opponent's world. If he lost, it would naturally be these living beings that lost. After coming to a sudden realization of this, Luo Fan was suddenly even more determined to break away from the control of this luck path river. Because although he suddenly understood all of this, he had even more doubts in his mind. In the end, who was the cause and who was the effect between the living beings in this world and the battle between him and his opponent? Was it because he wanted a real, macroscopic battle that allowed these living beings to win, or was it because these living beings won that allowed him to win in a real, macroscopic battle that allowed him to win? If he had a murderous intent towards others, living beings that were born in this world would appear to attack the corresponding world of the living beings that endured his murderous intent. In that case, if other people had murderous intent towards him, naturally there should also be living beings that would attack his world. If the other party had a special method that allowed living beings that were born in other worlds to actually destroy his world, what would the outcome be? And so on and so forth. All of these doubts made Luo Fan's mood a little irritated. This is the outcome of fate being controlled. He sighed to himself. Then, with a thought, all of these distracting thoughts were instantly cut off by him. Then, he cast his gaze towards the corresponding world that was opened by the float again. It was useless to think too much about other things now. The most important thing now was to identify the root cause of the float's ability to allow various substances to set up a formation in his world. If he did it on his own initiative, what method did he use to do it? If he did not do it on his own initiative, then what was the reason for such a phenomenon? All of this was even more important to him now. If it was before those living beings from the third camp appeared, he would not have any way to invade the corresponding world that was opened by the float and search for the reason in that world. However, the situation was different now. These living beings from the third camp were his hope. Luo Fan's heart moved, and this trace of consciousness attached to the statue left the statue. The moment he left the statue that had shrunk to the size of a normal person suddenly collapsed and turned into dust that filled the sky. In the blink of an eye, it sank into the land below, suddenly adding a layer that was neither thick nor thin to the land. Then his consciousness directly poured into the body of the living being that was born in this world. It was like a piece of white paper that belonged to the third camp. In an instant, it replaced the consciousness that was about to be born and transformed into that living being. This was the method that he thought of. This living being, because it was different from ordinary living beings that communicated with substances, it could carry his consciousness and break through the barrier of another world and invade another world. This was not difficult to understand. Luo Fan's consciousness itself was somewhat estranged from his own world, so it was difficult for him to take the initiative to enter this world, let alone the other worlds that corresponded to other people. If he attached his consciousness to an ordinary living being that communicated with substances and wanted to enter another world, the other world's defenses and repulsive force would be impossible. This was the reason why he could not think of a way before. However, if he attached his consciousness to the living beings that were responsible for invading and fighting, the situation would be completely different. However, if he attached his consciousness to the invading and fighting beings, the situation would be completely different. They had to bypass the defenses of other worlds and block the repulsive force of other worlds to invade other worlds. Those living beings that were responsible for invading other worlds were illegal in the first place. With or without Luo Fan's consciousness, what was the difference? If they could invade before, with the addition of Luo Fan's consciousness, they would naturally be able to invade again. If they could not invade before, even without Luo Fan's consciousness, they would still not be able to invade. After fusing with that living being, Luo Fan suddenly found some other theurgy and magic arts from that living being's instincts. When they were combined, they could achieve countless powerful and unimaginable effects. They could allow this living being to easily pass through layers of worlds and even directly cross the nothingness between worlds, break through the barrier of another world, and break into that world. These theurgy and magic arts, they were not magic arts that existed in Luo Fan's own memories. In fact, the profoundness within them was not something that Luo Fan could create at the moment. They came directly from the River of Luck and came from the state of chaos. In fact, they came from an existence that was a level higher than the state of chaos. Its own power might not be very strong, but for Luo Fan, who was at the level 5 pseudo-sage rank, its strengthening effect was quite ordinary. However, there were many profoundness of the river of Luck Dao within them. If Luo Fan could deduce the principles contained within these theurgy and magic arts, he would definitely be able to easily deduce a theurgy that was even more powerful and mysterious than the one that the book Venerable had imparted to him. Luo Fan was delighted. There's actually such a wonderful method. It's an unexpected gain. After obtaining the method, Luo Fan did not care about the other living beings. With a thought, he deduced those theurgy to the extreme in a few moves. Then they instantly condensed into several kinds of magic treasures. These theurgy obtained from this living being's instincts were extremely wonderful. After condensing into magic treasures, they turned into all kinds of extremely practical things. For example, one of the realm-crossing theurgy condensed into a realm-crossing divine boat, and one of the attack theurgy directly condensed into a long sword that could slash the space and time of this Luck Dao world, and so on. After condensing these theurgy into magic treasures, Luo Fan was instantly armed to the teeth. He looked like a character in a game. Looking at the various magic treasures on him and feeling the wonderful effects of these magic treasures, Luo Fan could not help but smile. With a thought, he stepped onto the realm-crossing divine boat. As soon as he activated it, he broke through the barrier of the world around him. Then, with an unimaginable speed, he shot towards the world corresponding to the float. Along the way, his speed was shockingly fast, surpassing countless living beings that were originally heading towards that world. He was the first living being to invade a world, breaking through the barrier of the world and rushing into the corresponding world of the Kai Fu Zi. The corresponding world of the Kai Fu Zi was completely different from the corresponding world of Luo Fan. Although it was the same world, the scenery inside the world was completely different. This world was formed by countless pieces of land floating in the void. The space of this world added up was also extremely vast. It was also not inferior to the corresponding world of Luo Fan, and the number of living beings that existed in it was also beyond the limit of what could be described with numbers. However, the matter is tens of millions of times less. Luo Fan raised his eyes and swept his gaze across this world. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and he instantly calculated the result. After discovering the amount of matter in this world, Luo Fan suddenly understood that the number of worlds in the River of Luck Dao was related to the time that the River of Luck Dao had existed. In other words, although Luo Fan had only cultivated for trillions of years since the beginning of the primordial world, if he were to add the time that he had accumulated through countless reincarnations, this time would definitely be tens of millions of times longer than the Kai Fu Zi, not to mention anything else. Before Luo Fan transmigrated, he had been born on Earth countless eras after the destruction of the world. Before that, the number of reincarnations he had experienced was, of course, countless times more than the Kai Fu Zi that had been born before the Earth's universe had shattered, and the Luck Dao world and the River of Luck Dao even surpassed the perfect world. Of course, it was only related to the life essence of living beings. However, it would not disappear because of reincarnation. Therefore, the time that it existed was definitely from the birth of its life essence, through countless reincarnations, until the moment when its body and soul were destroyed. Looking at the matter in the Kai Fu Zi world in front of him, as well as the difference in age between the two, Luo Fan instantly understood this secret. Just as Luo Fan was secretly weighing the various things in this world. Suddenly, a living being descended from the sky and stopped in front of Luo Fan. He shouted, "Invader, leave this world or die." This living being, he looked like a burly man. He had a majestic figure. Standing there, he naturally exuded an awe-inspiring murderous aura. He held a huge axe in his hand and wore a golden armor. His expression was extremely awe-inspiring. At this moment, Luo Fan wanted to see the secret of this world and why the matter that entered his world would naturally form that array. Naturally, it was impossible for him to leave this world as soon as he entered. Without answering, the long sword in his hand flashed. In an instant, the living being in front of him was completely shattered. All the matter that made up his body dispersed in an instant. It was completely swallowed by the surrounding endless space and disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan did not pay much attention to this living being. In the blink of an eye, he observed this world and the unknown number of continents floating above the endless void. He secretly deduced the mysteries within. In this world, there were also endless living beings constantly entering and exiting this entire world. They constantly went to other worlds to exchange matter. Their constant entry and exit caused the continents in this world to grow constantly. It could be said that almost every moment, there were new continents appearing in this world. New lands appeared in this world, and at the same time, countless living beings were born in this world. Unlike Luo Fan's world, all living beings in this world had the ability to enter and exit other worlds. However, there were no living beings that only lived in this world and did not leave it. The composition of these continents itself is nothing special. If you insist on saying that there is, it will only make this world more stable. Luo Fan looked at it for a while and frowned. The countless continents that existed in the void in front of him were circulating in the void in a mysterious way. However, this circulation did not have too special an effect. It only continuously strengthened the void and the world. However, it did not operate on the matter that left this world, nor did it add any special attributes to these matters so that they would change when they went to other worlds. This clearly meant that these continents were not the source that Luo Fan was looking for. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan was obviously not satisfied. At this moment, a few living beings descended from the sky and started scolding Luo Fan. As for these living beings, Luo Fan, who was sitting on the cross-border divine boat, did not even move his body. With a turn of the long sword in his hand, these living beings were completely destroyed in an instant. They were completely destroyed, leaving nothing behind. It seems like I have to find a living beings that entered this world from my world and see where they exchange matter, Luo Fan thought to himself. With this thought, he spread out his perception and began to carefully sense the living beings that existed in this world. Chapter 1405. The living beings that had come from his world possessed an imprint that belonged to his world. To Luo Fan, this imprint was as obvious as a firefly in the darkness. Thus, in an instant, he grasped the positions of the creatures that came from his world. Because the exchange of matter between worlds was endless, the number of living beings that came from Luo Fan's corresponding world of Luck Dao was still in the hundreds of millions. From Luo Fan's point of view, the essence of these living beings was merely the exchange of matter between many worlds. However, the truth was that these living beings had their own thoughts, wishes, desires, and responsibilities. Therefore, the living beings in this world didn't just put down the materials that belonged to Luo Fan's world, pick up the materials from this world, and leave. Instead, according to some business rules, he would trade with the creatures in this world. He would use the goods from Luo Fan's Luck Dao world to exchange for goods from this world, and then bring them into Luo Fan's world to consume and use. In the end, after the material cycle, it fused with the world and became a part of it. From this point of view, Luo Fan had ordered these living beings in his Luck Dao world to pile up the materials that came from the corresponding world of the float in a certain place, which was obviously against the will of the living beings. If it wasn't for the fact that Luo Fan had unimaginable prestige in his own world and was loved and respected by all living beings, Luo Fan wouldn't have been able to survive. Such a request could not be carried out so thoroughly. After locking onto the many living beings, Luo Fan began to sense what they were exchanging. This process was a huge project. This made it difficult for Luo Fan to pay too much attention to his surroundings. Just by relying on his own instincts, he chopped those creatures that belonged to this world that attacked him one by one. After all, Luo Fan's realm was extremely high. He was more than 10,000 times better at using the same power, the same divine abilities, and the same spells than this creature was born with. The attacks of this world that targeted single living beings did not pose much of a threat to him. Very soon, in the void around Luo Fan, it was filled with the fragments and dust of the creatures born in this world. Furthermore, because there were simply too many living beings that had died, an indescribable baleful aura was gradually forming in this place. It turned the area into a dusky gray. It was as if it had been swallowed by some kind of chaotic existence. That was because Luo Fan's achievements were too shocking. The number of creatures that the world had evolved to target Luo Fan was increasing. His strength grew stronger and stronger. At first, there were only a few births, but when the number of deaths exceeded 1,000, the number had already increased to dozens. Then, when the number of dead creatures reached tens of thousands, hundreds of them were born at the same time. In the end, when the third camp of living beings from Luo Fan's Luck Path world arrived, there were hundreds of thousands of living beings appearing in this area each time. The third camp of living beings was almost at the same speed, so they appeared in hundreds of millions. They blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they appeared in this world. In an instant, they drowned one of the continents in this world. Endless divine abilities surged out and directly destroyed that continent. The space that the continent was in was completely destroyed, not to mention any living creatures that existed on it. During this process, the third camp of living beings absorbed a certain power produced by the destruction of the continent. Not only did they not suffer any losses, but they even received a powerful boost from it. They were replenished by the powerful power and became even more powerful. After these living beings entered this world, the world naturally gave birth to countless living beings in response to their existence and welcomed them. However, they were on the passive side after all. Even though the evolution speed was extremely fast, there was still a limit. This action only slightly delayed the attack of the third camp of living beings from Luo Fan's Luck Path world. It could not stop these living beings from attacking and destroying those continents, or rather, this world. Soon, the second continent was destroyed. That creature grew a little bit more, becoming a little stronger than before. Then, the third continent was destroyed, and the fourth continent was destroyed. This change made Luo Fan's side become secondary. After all, although Luo Fan had killed a lot of living beings in this world, they had been specially sent by this world. Luo Fan did not take the initiative to harm them, nor did he harm this world. Compared to the hundreds of millions of living beings that came like locusts, Luo Fan was obviously not that worthy of this world's attention. The living beings that were sent to target him naturally stopped. This made Luo Fan feel much more relaxed. He would have more energy to search for the answers he wanted. There were many living beings that came from Luo Fan's Luck Path world, and the number of commercial activities they did at every moment was unimaginable. Most of them were ordinary, normal goods, or rather, normal material exchanges. Only an extremely small portion of them could be considered as the products that formed the formation and ultimately formed the Luck Path suppression. It was obviously extremely difficult for Luo Fan to find these special materials among the countless commercial activities and further find the source of the changes in these materials. Therefore, although Luo Fan had been in this world for a long time, he still only found a small portion of the materials that could form the formation. He still did not have the ability to find the source of the formation. These materials seemed to have that strange attribute out of nowhere. What's the reason? Is it because of the influence of the laws of this world, or something else? Luo Fan frowned and pondered. Through observing the process of the formation of those materials, he had already discovered the process of the formation of the various special attributes. However, this discovery only made him more confused, but it did not solve the problem in his heart. Unable to find the answer no matter how he searched, Luo Fan had an idea. He cast his gaze towards the law layer of this world to search for the source that might have caused the changes in the materials. The laws of any world were extremely complicated and mysterious. Even if Luo Fan's body was here, it would be difficult for him to completely understand all the laws of this world in an instant. He could completely see the use of any of the laws or laws. Then, he could analyze which law or law had played a role. Furthermore, his body here was only an ordinary one, a living being from the third camp that was born in his Luck Dao world. That was the sensing ability and deduction ability. They were far inferior to his body. Fortunately, after all, he could still observe those materials. In comparison, the difficulty of finding a specific law or law was reduced by 1,000 times. Such a comparison process. It went on for several months. At this time, this world had already fallen into a large-scale war. The third camp of living beings born in Luo Fan's Luck Path world were constantly breaking through the void, and the world was constantly producing living beings that were born to deal with these living beings. Although Luo Fan's side had gained some advantage and completely destroyed hundreds of thousands of continents at the beginning because they had caught the other party off guard at the beginning. But later on, when the world reacted, their speed of advancement became extremely slow. At first, they could break a continent in a short while, but now they couldn't break a continent or destroy the space where a continent was located for nearly a month. After all, this was an away battle. Such an outcome was unavoidable. In these several months, Luo Fan hadn't encountered any attacks from any living beings. His position seemed to have been completely forgotten by both sides, which was completely different from the chaos in this world. Instead, it was especially quiet. Although these two worlds were currently engaged in a fierce war, the material exchange between these two worlds was still continuing. However, the material exchange between the two worlds continued and wasn't interrupted by the battle between the two sides. This was clearly a rule of a higher order, and it wasn't that easy to cut it off. In fact, this could be seen just from logical reasoning alone. If this kind of material exchange could really be cut off so easily, then wouldn't anyone be able to completely cut off all material exchanges with other worlds as long as they had killing intent towards all living beings in the universe? Wouldn't that mean that the Luck Path world would be freed from its restraints and be able to move freely, and thus transcend the long river of Luck Path? That was obviously impossible. It was precisely because the material exchange between the two worlds was still continuing that during this process, Luo Fan could still sense the existence of this world and the changes of the materials that were about to enter his world. Moreover, he wouldn't be unable to sense it because there was no material exchange going on. The law layer was really too complicated and abstruse. Even though Luo Fan had spent several months, he still hadn't found the law related to the changes of the materials. However, even so, it wasn't that he didn't gain anything. This world was a Luck Path world, and the law layer was extremely different from the real world, and even from Luo Fan's own Luck Path world. Although he didn't find the law he wanted to find in these several months, he had an extremely deep understanding of the law layer through his study of the law layer of this world. At this moment, the power of his divine ability in this world skyrocketed because of this. Compared to a few months ago, the current Luo Fan was at least 100 times stronger. This was considered an unexpected gain. On this day, Luo Fan was searching in the law layer. All of a sudden, he sensed that a material somewhere in this world had suddenly changed. During this change, he sensed that millions of laws were undergoing a slight change at the same time. This change was extremely subtle. If he didn't happen to be sensing that part of the law at this moment, and the power of his divine ability was 100 times stronger than before, he wouldn't have been able to sense these changes. Millions of laws. Luo Fan's eyes lit up, and he was overjoyed. He felt that he seemed to have discovered something. But very soon, he realized why he hadn't found the source of the change after searching for so long. He had always thought that it was only a few laws or laws that had caused a substance to undergo special changes and be imbued with special attributes. The direction he was searching in was also the same direction. Such a mistake. It made him misjudge the changes that occurred when the laws affected the changes of the materials. He had greatly overestimated them. Such changes were happening under his command. It would be strange if he could still find the laws that caused the changes. With this change in mind, Luo Fan suddenly saw the light. In an instant, he discovered the effects of hundreds of changes of the materials. The corresponding laws and laws. Every substance had a different set of laws that acted upon it. But they all had a common characteristic. That was, millions of laws and laws were also taking effect at the same time. Some of the laws and laws that affected the changes of the materials were the same, but some were different. To put it more vividly, the many laws and laws were like intersecting circles. There were overlaps and there were separations. Under such circumstances, it was needless to say where one should go to find the more fundamental laws of law. Luo Fan instantly turned his attention to the overlapping laws and laws. This change shrunk the millions of nomological laws to a few 100,000. And as he studied more and more changes of the materials, he reduced the laws and laws more and more. After another month, when the creatures that came from his Luck Dao world were forced to retreat by the counterattack of this world, he finally reduced the millions of laws and laws to a single law. So, the root cause is you. At this time, Luo Fan's face showed a look of relief. The hard work of the past few months was naturally nothing to his original body, but for his current body, the pressure was too great. After a few months like this, although his body was not as exaggerated as a lamp that had run out of oil, it was still extremely tired. At this time, when the changes suddenly stopped, he naturally felt a little more relaxed. With a thought, he made a grabbing motion, and that law fell into his hand. The moment he came into contact with the laws, he felt an incomparably heavy and noble feeling emanating from the laws, which made him feel relaxed. What kind of law is this? This seems to be unique to this Luck Dao world. What is its use? Luo Fan stroked this law, but he had countless doubts in his heart. This law itself was extremely profound and abstruse. Even though he was stroking this law now, he could not find the specific use of this law, let alone find a deeper root. As a level 5 pseudo-saint who had comprehended the true meaning of cultivation, Luo Fan naturally had countless mystic abilities to study laws or laws. It was just that normally, he only needed to look at a certain rule or a certain law, and he would naturally be able to understand its effects and use. Naturally, he didn't need to use divine abilities to study it. Now that he could no longer find the real use of this law, these mystic abilities naturally had a place to be used. With a thought, the power in Luo Fan's body surged, and mystic abilities were inserted into the law in his hand. With the feedback of the mystic abilities, all sorts of information belonging to this law was continuously learned by Luo Fan. After a few days, Luo Fan stopped this process and slowly raised his head to look at the sky of this world. To be more specific, he was looking at a certain boundary of this world. After a few days of research, he discovered something. This rule gave him a dignified and noble feeling, but it wasn't the rule itself that gave him this feeling. Instead, it was a feeling that was transmitted by some other existence through the law itself. This law itself did not have too special an effect. It could only transfer the power of some other existence and release it to affect other laws. In other words, the existence that was connected to this law and did not belong to the laws of this world was what Luo Fan was looking for. It was the source that causes Luck Dao to be suppressed by Kai Fu Zi's Luck Dao. And according to this law, that strange existence was at the end of the direction that Luo Fan was looking at. It was that thing that was outside this world and attached to the surface of this world. At this moment, Luo Fan had a rather complicated feeling in his heart. There was joy from finding the answer, doubt from that existence, and even more anger from finding the existence that controlled his mind. His heart moved. The Transrealm Divine boat under him surged slightly. In the blink of an eye, it had already charged past this world that Kai Fu Zi was transported to and directly arrived at the surface of that world. When he arrived here, Luo Fan was slightly stunned because he discovered that in this place, there was an extremely small one. Even when he looked at it now, there was a light ring that was as small as a speck of dust. This is the light ring that caused all of this. Luo Fan frowned and thought to himself. Divine light gathered in his eyes, and that light ring rapidly expanded in his eyes. In an instant, it expanded from the size of a speck of dust to the size of a water tank. Everything inside and outside the light ring was completely seen by him in an instant. He saw through it. There were endless lines. These lines were extremely strange. They didn't seem to have any traces of human activity at all, as if they were purely natural. None of the lines on them had any trace of being chiseled. They seemed to be the lines inside a stone that had been deeply cracked over a long period of time. While like the lines that could be seen after a branch was cut vertically, it was more like the cracks formed after a watermelon was casually smashed on the ground. These lines were all emitting a strange light, and when combined together, they formed such a light ring. And the light that the lines emitted was not simple. It had a dignified and noble charm. Even when Luo Fan stood in front of it, he couldn't help but be shocked. He naturally felt that it was so dignified and noble. Looking at the endless lines on this light ring, Luo Fan thought to himself, this is definitely not a technique that a level 9 pseudo-sage can have. If it's not naturally formed, it must be the technique of a sage. He had already comprehended the true meaning of cultivation, and could even comprehend the mysteries of level 9 pseudo-sage. When he saw these lines, he felt that they were only natural, and he couldn't find any trace of being chiseled. This meant that these lines were either naturally formed, or they were created by an existence that surpassed the level 9 pseudo-sage. Either way, it was enough to eliminate the suspicion of Kai Busey. If it was naturally formed, then it couldn't be the result of Kai Busey's initiative. As for the method of a sage, it was needless to say. If Kai Busey had the ability to ask a sage to do this, why would he need to rely on Luo Fan and participate in that so-called Tao discussion? With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed the light ring. This light ring was so profound that he planned to take it back and study it properly. He wanted to see if he could comprehend the mysteries of the River of Luck from it, so that he could more easily sever the connection between his luck and the River of Luck and obtain true transcendence and true freedom. The moment he grabbed it, the light ring suddenly shone brightly. After that, a peerlessly formidable force erupted from above and smashed half of his body into pieces. If he hadn't reacted quickly and retreated quickly, then perhaps the remaining half of his body would have been destroyed in an instant. The situation was extremely tragic. Luo Fan endured the intense pain and looked at the light ring that was as small as a speck of dust with lingering fear. He circulated his power with great difficulty and quickly repaired the half of his body that had been shattered. It actually has such a powerful defense. This light ring really isn't simple. Although his current body was only the body of an ordinary living being from the third camp that was born in his Luckdao world, and it was naturally much weaker than his original body, it was extremely powerful after being strengthened many times. It was now comparable to a quasi-sage. Chapter 1406. After his body had fully recovered, Luo Fan frowned as he looked at the halo that was as small as a speck of dust, his heart filled with shock. Watermark advertisement, test watermark advertisement test. Not only was the structure of the halo extremely mysterious, but it also seemed to be naturally formed, and its power was also so powerful. To him, this was an unimaginable fact. However, even though he was shocked by the halo's power, Luo Fan did not give up on the idea of grabbing the halo. The more powerful and incredible the halo was, the more he wanted to study it thoroughly. However, since the halo was so powerful, he naturally couldn't casually grab it like he did before. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, and all sorts of incredible mysteries flashed through his mind continuously. In the instant that the halo was repelled, the countless incredible changes that occurred on the halo kept replaying in his mind. In order to unleash such shocking power, the halo naturally had to undergo countless changes. And these changes were the way to understand the secret of the halo. Through these changes, Luo Fan gradually sensed some of the mysteries of the halo. Of course, these mysteries were more about the mysteries of the halo's terrifying power, and not the halo itself, which allowed Kai Fuzi's luck to suppress Luo Fan's luck. It's actually such a mysterious change. When he comprehended the mysteries, Luo Fan could not help but be delighted. Such a mystery. However, it was completely different from what he had experienced and seen in the past. It was even different from all the profound mysteries of the sages that he knew. It was a profundity that wasn't complicated. On the contrary, it seemed to be extremely simple and unadorned. However, it was precisely this simple and unadorned profundity that was able to erupt with a might that far surpassed all the divine abilities that Luo Fan knew in the past. Just now, the power that the halo had unleashed was actually equivalent to a gentle push from an ordinary person. However, it was this power that was transformed by the endless lines on the halo. It actually unleashed such an incredible effect. It almost completely destroyed Luo Fan's body, which was already comparable to that of a quasi-sage. This kind of terrifying growth rate, how sensational it was. Although this mystery had its limits, it was impossible for Luo Fan to use this mystery to display the power of the Saint Realm at this time. However, it was enough to give him the power of a level 5 pseudo-sage. He could unleash the effect of a level 9 pseudo-sage. He had obtained a mystery that could greatly enhance his strength. It was no wonder that Luo Fan was so happy at this time after seeing a brand new and completely different power system. That momentary change, just now, was too short. Although Luo Fan had an unimaginable observation ability, his memory ability had only obtained this mystery in the end. In the end, he only managed to obtain this mystery with his memory ability. There were even more profound mysteries that he still couldn't understand. However, through this profound mystery, he also knew how to take the halo out. He deduced this mystery in reverse, and according to his own worldview, he continued to decompose and transform this mystery. Finally, he deduced a divine ability that could bypass the halo and use this mystery to erupt with terrifying power. In just a few breaths, he deduced dozens of such divine abilities. In just a few breaths, he deduced dozens of such divine abilities. Then, he casually chose one from them. With a thought, the power in his body surged, and all kinds of strange changes occurred. The divine ability that he created condensed into a treasure in front of him in a short while. It looked like an arm, but it seemed a little illusory, as if it was made of air. It could collapse and be destroyed at any time, vanishing into nothingness. After this arm took shape, it suddenly shook, causing the surrounding void to tremble violently. Then, the arm grabbed downwards and grabbed the halo that was as small as a speck of dust. This time, the halo only shook slightly. The power that was enough to make half of Luo Fan's body collapse did not erupt. It actually allowed the somewhat illusory arm to easily grab the halo. However, just as Luo Fan wanted to lift the halo and take it away, he discovered that the halo was extremely heavy. This kind of weight could no longer be described by ordinary weight. It was the terrifying weight of countless worlds and universes added together. This kind of weight was enough to form a black hole in any universe, producing a terrifying suction force that could completely suck everything in the universe into it. However, in this place, this kind of weight had no effect on the halo other than making it feel heavy. The halo was still a halo, and it still had that kind of heavy and noble aura. It was still covered with endless lines, as if it was naturally formed. Although the creature that Luo Fan was currently possessing was already as powerful as a quasi-sage, it still couldn't lift the halo. He struggled for a long time, only to find that the halo did not move at all. It was not shaken by the magic treasure that he condensed in the shape of an arm at all. During this process, the lines on the halo did not change at all. The lines were still the same as before, flowing like normal. With the help of that rule, the inexplicable changes were transmitted into Kai Fu Zi's luck path world. In the end, after various extremely complicated changes, it caused Kai Fu Zi's luck path to suppress Luo Fan's luck path. If it was not for the fact that the halo itself was heavier than this luck path world, The force that Luo Fan moved would have been enough to collapse a large part of that world. He would even suspect that the halo was growing on this luck path world. After a long time, Luo Fan could only stop moving. He thought to himself, "It's impossible for this body to move this halo. I have to guide the power of my main body to be able to do this." His main body was not just a level 5 pseudo-sage, because he had previously comprehended that mystery. Coupled with his original comprehension, he could perfectly unleash the power of a level 9 pseudo-sage. If the power of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron was added, the power that he could unleash would be thousands or even tens of thousands of times stronger. With such power, it would definitely not be a problem to move the halo that was as heavy as countless worlds and universes added together. This was the Luck Path River. The Luck Path world, and it was something that Luo Fan's main body could not come in contact with. It was in a mysterious and unbelievable state. In such a state, Luo Fan wanted to directly descend into this world. Of course, it was impossible. However, not being able to directly descend into this world did not mean that he could not transmit his power to this world and be used by his current body in this world. Just like how he could summon his will into the Luck Path world with the help of the living beings in his Luck Path world. His power. Naturally, he could use the same method to descend. After thinking it through, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He directly began to set up an array on the surface of the Luck Path River. He wanted to set up an altar. Setting up an altar was a way to communicate with powerful living beings that could not reach this place. The mystery behind it was broad and profound. If one were to study it deeply, they could even form an extremely strict cultivation system. What Luo Fan needed to do now was to use his body as the communication terminal of this altar. With the help of this altar, he would transmit the power of his body from the outside world, and through the altar, he would use it to grab the halo. Using the altar to communicate with his main body was something that could only be done by countless living beings. The process was naturally extremely complicated. Even with Luo Fan's ability, he had to prepare for several days before he could finish setting up the formation. After he activated the array with his own power, the altar was finally formed in the center of the array. The altar was a 9-layered platform in the shape of an 8 trigrams. Compared to his current body, its surface area was extremely vast. It was hundreds of thousands of miles wide. Just the size of the altar in the center was already so large. It was imaginable how vast the entire array was. Luo Fan stood on the altar, raised his hands high, and poured his will into the altar. In an instant, the entire array formation shook. His will directly went through countless changes in the array formation, and finally broke through the limit of the River of Luck, descending into the real world. It directly arrived in front of Luo Fan's main body. Sensing the return of the will, Luo Fan's main body did not hesitate to transfer the power he could summon through the will. In an instant, the reverse process of the will's changes suddenly appeared. After countless changes, Luo Fan's power underwent some extremely subtle changes. It directly flowed into his body in the Luck Path River. In an instant, the essence of his body strengthened many times. A feeling of being able to lift the entire universe arose spontaneously. Due to this feeling, Luo Fan poured his power into the mystic ability that he had specially created for the halo. In other words, the arm that seemed like it could scatter and collapse at any time. In an instant, the arm suddenly strengthened billions of times. With a sudden grab, he caught the dust-like halo. Then, with a sudden jerk, the halo slowly left the surface of the world amidst cracking sounds. Its connection with the rule was abruptly severed. As the connection between the law and the halo was severed, the entire Luck Path world below underwent an inexplicable change. In an instant, the entire Luck Path world below underwent an inexplicable change. All the living beings that belonged to Luo Fan's Luck Path world left the Luck Path world in various natural ways and headed towards Luo Fan's Luck Path world. During this process, Many of those living creatures even threw away the matter that belonged to the luck path world at a loss. They completely ignored the fact that these matter could bring them great benefits and make them more powerful. As for the third camp, those living creatures that specialized in fighting also retreated as they fought. They gradually withdrew from this world and returned to Luo Fan's luck path world along with the other living creatures that specialized in the exchange of matter. Finally, after all the changes stopped, the world of luck way below had become the same as the endless worlds around it. It had become an ordinary world of luck way where only a few living beings came here to exchange materials. This clearly meant that the relationship between Luo Fan and Kai Fuzi had returned to normal, at least in terms of luck path. When he sensed this change, Luo Fan let out a long sigh of relief, and an indescribable expression of relief appeared on his face. Although he had used all sorts of methods to prevent his luck path from being suppressed by Kai Fuzi's luck path, he still couldn't find a reason. He couldn't completely eradicate this suppression. This still made him feel a little irritated, and he couldn't relax. Although he still couldn't figure out the true mysteries of this halo, he knew that this halo was the key. As long as he could move this halo away, he would be able to do so. As long as he moved this halo away, he could naturally eliminate this suppression of luck path. Of course, it would be much easier. After that halo left Kai Fuzi's world, it began to flicker violently and struggle intensely. It seemed like it was trying its best to return to its original position. It also seemed like it was looking for another world to attach itself to. It was unimaginably heavy, so one could imagine the strength of such a struggle. If Luo Fan hadn't used his own body's formidable strength to hold this halo, perhaps he would have already lost control of this halo due to this small change. Facing this halo, Luo Fan's expression was extremely calm. He stood there, raised his hand, and slowly pressed down on the altar. Then, he used this halo as a sacrifice and offered it to Luo Fan's main body through this altar. Using an altar to communicate with a powerful existence was a form of sacrifice. As for offerings, it was usually an equivalent exchange. If one wanted to obtain something from a powerful existence, one would naturally have to pay a corresponding price. Just like now, although Luo Fan was offering his main body and obtaining power through this altar, he still had to abide by the rules of the sacrifice. Since his main body was transferring a powerful force, this body naturally had to pay a corresponding price to repay it. Now, this body was using this halo to repay it. This repayment was in accordance with the rules of the sacrifice. The altar would naturally use all sorts of incredible methods to transfer the halo from the River of Luck to the hands of Luo Fan's main body. The instant the halo started to transfer, the corresponding parts of the altar started to collapse. Amidst the loud rumbling sounds, starting from the center of the altar started to collapse layer by layer. Eventually, it spread to the entire altar and the vast array formation. In the end, when the altar transmitted the halo out of the Luck Path River and directly to Luo Fan, the altar and the vast array formation had been completely destroyed. In the River of Luck, the body that Luo Fan's was attached to instantly collapsed and dissipated. That strand will left the River of Luck and returned to Luo Fan's body. The changes in the River of Luck had been resolved, and there was no need for him to deal with anything here. Naturally, there was no need for him to stay here any longer. However, because he had set up a three-dimensional talisman with a vast range in his Luck Dao world, he had left a strong imprint in it. On the other hand, he could remotely activate the mark at any time and summon his will into it. He no longer needed the summons of all beings in the Luck Dao world to enter. After returning to his original body, Luo Fan felt as if there were countless worlds in his hands. Crackling sounds came from his arm. This was a sign that the bones in his arm could not bear the terrifying weight and were about to collapse. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the halo was too heavy, and he could not hold it perfectly with his current ability. He quickly summoned the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron and pulled the halo into the cauldron. After the Divine Hall's Heavenly Cauldron obtained a few Saint Wills, Its quality had already risen to a level that surpassed ordinary grade 9 pseudo-saint artifacts. Although the halo was unimaginably heavy, it only caused the Divine Hall's heavenly cauldron to become heavier, and it didn't cause any damage to the Divine Hall's heavenly cauldron. It was so much so that the Divine Hall's heavenly cauldrons might have grown stronger and more terrifying. Sensing the change in the Divine Court heavenly cauldron's power, Luo Fan was secretly pleasantly surprised. This is an unexpected gain, suddenly. He furrowed his brows and raised his hand to grab a figure from the boundless universe that he had opened up. This figure looked battered and exhausted. Half of his body had disappeared, and the power within his body was constantly dissipating. Looking at the speed at which it was disappearing, all of his power would disappear in a few breaths' time. This figure was obviously Kai Bwozi. During the time that Luo Fan was dealing with the changes in the River of Luck, Kai Bwozi was having a hard time when he was roaming those universes. He was being held back everywhere. Difficulties were everywhere. Although he had broken through to the fourth world with great difficulty, he had suffered countless attacks after entering the fifth world. But after entering the fifth world, he suffered countless attacks, and in the end, he was almost killed by those attacks. His soul was destroyed. If Luo Fan had not discovered it early, if he had been a few breaths slower, he would have died and his soul would have been destroyed. Now that Luo Fan had solved the problem of the suppression of luck, his displeasure towards Kai Bwozi had disappeared. It was not only because the suppression of luck might not have been the result of Kai Bwozi's initiative. It was also because he had comprehended many of the profundities of the River of Luck through this incident, and obtained many principles that he could not obtain in the past. Because of this, he had saved Kai Bwozi at the last moment. Just when Kai Bwozi was feeling the terror of death, he suddenly felt the killing intent and evil intent disappear. Instead, it was replaced by an extremely peaceful and calm feeling. He was extremely shocked. However, the power within his body was dissipating. If he delayed any longer, his soul might be destroyed. How could he dare to delay any longer? He immediately sat down cross-legged and started stabilizing his power, trying his best to recover from his injuries. As a grade 8 pseudo-saint, the amount of energy he needed to recover from his injuries was naturally extremely terrifying. However, even innate, grand, heavenly, immortal realm cultivators could form their own bodies and generate their own power. As a grade 8 pseudo-saint, it would not be a problem for him. Therefore, even though he was healing in Luo Fan's cave abode, it did not affect Luo Fan's cave abode at all. On the contrary, because the power in his body was constantly dispersing, the concentration of Yuan Qi in Luo Fan's cave had increased a lot along with the influx of power, which could be considered to have brought him some benefits. Kai Bwozi cultivated and healed for half a day before his injuries stabilized. He even completely recovered the half of his body that he had lost. Although he still needed to spend time cultivating to fully recover his injuries and his body to a perfect state, his life was no longer in danger. However, his life was no longer in danger, and he had the ability to protect himself. At this moment, he opened his eyes and looked around. He saw Luo Fan, who was looking at him with an expressionless face. Thinking back to everything that happened before, how could he not understand that Luo Fan had saved him? For a moment, he had mixed feelings in his heart. In the end, an inexplicable sense of disappointment appeared on his face. "I fail," he muttered. Luo Fan said indifferently, "That's right. I want to wait for you to pass the checkpoint and see how much time it would take. Now it seems..." Hearing this, Kai Bwozi's face instantly turned red. This was shameful. I can't even pass Senior Luo Zun's test. I'm really ashamed. Luo Fan did not continue this and asked instead, "Before you came here, did you calculate the good or bad luck of this trip?" Kai Bwozi had already recovered his composure and calmed down. He said, "Yes, I did calculate it before. I was just going through the motions and didn't think that I would get any results. However, I didn't expect the result to surprise me. The result of the calculation was unexpectedly clear." Luo Fan said indifferently, turning misfortune into fortune, turning misfortune into fortune, and getting a blessing in disguise. Kai Buozi was stunned at first, then he was shocked. That's right. Senior Luo Zun's divine foresight is beyond my reach. Luo Fan thought to himself. As expected, this must be the effect of that halo. Looks like I need to study that halo more seriously. Luo Fan did not speak. Kai Buozi, who had lost his arrogance to Luo Fan, was confused, but he did not dare to speak. After a while, Luo Fan said, I increased the difficulty of this test later on. With your own strength, passing the original test was not a problem. If you are willing, I can recommend you to participate in the Tao discussion. Chapter 1407. After a while, Kai Fuzi said, Thank you for your recommendation, Senior Luo Zun. Watermark advertisement test. Watermark advertisement test. Luo Fan listened and just nodded. Naturally, he knew that Kai Fuzi was rather unwilling to accept this outcome. If he was a normal person, he might have rejected it for the sake of his reputation. However, Kai Fuzi was a level 8 pseudo-sage, after all. Participating in the Tao discussion would be extremely beneficial to his cultivation. He obviously wouldn't delay it for the sake of his reputation. Since it was decided, Kai Fuzi naturally had no reason to stay in Luo Fan's cave abode any longer. Soon, he left Luo Fan's cave abode. After Kai Fuzi left, Luo Fan swiped his hand and completely erased the many universes that he had created for the sake of studying Kai Fuzi. The existence of these universes was for the sake of the test, so there was naturally no need for them now. After wiping away these universes, he sent a message to the venerated remnant through the cave abode. There wasn't much content in the message. It only asked if there were any procedures to recommend someone to participate in the Tao discussion and if it was against the rules. Very soon, the venerated remnant replied. The answer given by the venerated remnant was naturally affirmative. Moreover, it was very simple to recommend someone to participate in the Tao discussion, and there were no formalities at all. As long as the person Luo Fan wanted to recommend followed him to the Tao discussion venue, it would be fine. After understanding this, Luo Fan was relieved. After thanking the venerated remnant, he began to carefully sense the inside of the divine court heaven cauldron. Although the halo that he had just taken in was small, it seemed extremely heavy. There were countless lines on the halo, and these lines contained an extremely ancient mystery. It was a mystery that was completely different from all the cultivation paths that Luo Fan had comprehended so far. At this moment, this halo had been absorbed into Luo Fan's magic treasure and was completely under Luo Fan's control. Under such circumstances, it was many times easier to study the mysteries of this halo than to sense it with the body that he had casually occupied in the long river of luck. Zhang Xian's heart skipped a beat. Luo Fan's will directly descended into the divine court heavenly cauldron. He appeared directly in front of the halo. However, compared to before, even though his will was hundreds of millions of times stronger, its size had been compressed to an extremely small size. This degree of insignificance. He was even allowed to look at the halo here. They felt that the halo was as big as a wheel. Luo Fan's thoughts were extremely useful. A figure of Luo Fan appeared in the divine court heavenly cauldron and floated above the ring of light. Only after he had truly stabilized did he look at the halo. After the halo entered the heavenly cauldron of the divine court. However, it still did not calm down. Instead, it continued to struggle and tremble, as if it wanted to return to the river of luck. As it struggled and shook, the gray space inside the cauldron was constantly being broken and restored. First, he created one world after another. Then he destroyed the world completely, returning the entire space-time to its original gray state. Fortunately, Luo Fan's consciousness was inside the divine quartz heaven cauldron. It was like the divine quartz heaven cauldron itself, receiving the protection of the divine quartz heaven cauldron. As long as the divine quartz heaven cauldron was not broken or completely destroyed, his consciousness would not be harmed. Therefore, as the halo shook the entire space-time and created worlds and destroyed worlds, His whole body was not affected at all, even though it was floating in the middle of the cauldron. Those changes made it seem as if he was in a completely different time and space from where he was. With a thought, Luo Fan's consciousness body raised his hand, and the power of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court descended in an instant. It directly condensed into an illusory arm in front of him, as if it could completely collapse into countless fragments at any time. With a sudden grab, it caught the wheel-sized halo in it. The halo itself was enough to create countless worlds in this space-time and destroy them in an instant. But to this arm that seemed to be formed from the accumulation of mist, it was like an ordinary wheel. It was directly grabbed by the arm, unable to struggle or even shake. This was the magical effect of everything having its vanquisher. This arm had been deduced by Luo Fan based on the little bit of mystery that he had comprehended from the halo. It contained a power that completely targeted the halo's power, so the effect was naturally very obvious when used. After the halo stabilized, the surrounding space-time surged with the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron's power and transformed back into the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron's own power. Slowly raising the halo in front of him, Luo Fan's body slowly reached out towards the halo. Over the past few days, Luo Fan had already seen what the halo looked like very clearly. Studying the halo's appearance now would naturally not have much effect on studying the mysteries of the halo itself. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted to understand the various mysteries contained in the halo, the best way was to trigger a change in the halo itself. The instant Luo Fan's palm pressed against the halo, the countless lines on the halo seemed to suddenly come alive. The innumerable lines on the halo suddenly seemed to have come to life. They began to frantically change and surge. An incomparably powerful force emerged from the halo itself, followed Luo Fan's palm, and crazily surged towards his body. If the body that was used to test the halo was still the body that his will was attached to in the River of Luck, such a counterattack would have been enough to destroy Luo Fan. However, it was clear that Luo Fan's current body was not like that. Instead, it was the will body that was under the absolute protection of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. Although the strength of such a body was only a few thousand times stronger than the body in the River of Luck, it still could not withstand the waves of terrifying power. Unfortunately, it had the protection of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. Unfortunately, it had the protection of the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. Such a protection. Before the waves of terrifying destructive power that surged into Luo Fan's body could harm Luo Fan's body, it had already been transferred out and poured directly into the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron. In the end, the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron only emitted a buzzing sound. Neither the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron nor Luo Fan's body suffered any damage. After all, the Divine Court Heavenly Cauldron was a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure that had fused with 4 holy wills. It could be said to be the strongest existence in the world below the sages. In the face of such a terrifying existence, no matter how powerful the power contained in the halo was, what could it do? Luo Fan touched the halo with one hand. It felt rather strange. It seemed to be extremely hard, but it also felt like there was nothing there. It was as if he could directly probe into it with a little force. It was extremely strange. An extremely contradictory feeling appeared on the same thing at the same time. It was obviously an incredible thing. However, it was extremely normal here. In fact, Luo Fan could not even think that it was ridiculous. With a thought, Luo Fan exerted force in his hand. He suddenly reached into it and grabbed one of the lines in his hand. As the line entered his hand, the entire halo suddenly shook violently. The powerful force directly shattered his arm that was restraining the halo. In an instant, endless worlds were formed due to the vibrations of the halo. Following that, endless worlds were destroyed by the vibrations of the halo and then formed again. This cycle continued endlessly. Moreover, as if it had been stimulated by something, the intensity of the vibrations of the halo was several times stronger than at the beginning. The number of worlds that were formed due to the vibrations was several times more than before, and the state of destruction was also several times more tragic. During the vibrations, even though Luo Fan was protected by the divine court heavenly cauldron, he could no longer press his arm against the halo. Even so, a faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. In that period of time, the changes on the halo were already innumerable. The various mysteries revealed were more than enough for him to comprehend. In that short period of time, the changes on the halo were already innumerable, and the various mysteries revealed were more than enough for him to comprehend. As long as he could comprehend the mysteries revealed by the halo, he could use this comprehension to find a way to bypass the defense of the halo. When that time came, he might even be able to directly dismantle the halo and see all the mysteries contained within it with his eyes. The vibrations of the halo were obviously not permanent. After raging for a while, the intense reaction caused by Luo Fan's pulling of the lines gradually subsided. The halo also gradually returned to its original size. When Luo Fan saw the changes in the halo, he relaxed. His consciousness dispersed and returned to his body. Since he had already obtained the various conditions to further comprehend the mysteries of the halo, what he had to do next was naturally to comprehend the mysteries in the best manner possible. Obviously, the best way for Luo Fan to comprehend the mysteries was to use his body to directly comprehend it. As Luo Fan slowly closed his eyes, the endless changes revealed by the halo flashed through his mind. All sorts of strange mysteries were continuously sorted out and deduced by him from those details. As those mysteries were deduced, various abilities and corresponding techniques appeared in his mind. This gradually made him feel that his understanding of the luck path was continuously deepening, and he gradually felt that he was becoming more and more familiar with the long river of luck path. At a certain moment, Luo Fan's expression suddenly changed, and he suddenly opened his eyes. How is this possible? Could this be real? He murmured and instantly poured his consciousness into the divine court heavenly cauldron. It directly turned into a consciousness body and appeared above the halo that was still wreaking havoc in the space-time inside the divine court heavenly cauldron. He lowered his head and looked at the halo below, which seemed to have not changed at all compared to before, with a rather strange expression on his face. After a while, he said, "You don't have to pretend anymore. You've already exposed too many flaws." After he said that, there were no changes in his surroundings. What should have been calm was still calm. What should have been the birth of countless worlds was still the birth of countless worlds. What should have been the destruction of countless worlds was still the destruction of countless worlds. What should have been the constant struggle and quaking was still the constant struggle and quaking. Everything was everything. It seemed as if Luo Fan was talking to himself to entertain himself. Sensing such changes, Luo Fan frowned and said, "The way you quaked has already shown an obvious pattern. This doesn't seem like something that can be done by an inanimate object. Moreover, the worlds that were created by your quaking also have obvious tendencies. If the changes were caused by random changes, how could there be such tendencies?" As soon as these words came out, the halo below paused for a moment. Then, all the quaking stopped, and the surrounding countless worlds that were being created and destroyed completely disappeared in an instant, as if they did not exist at all. Following that, a very tender voice came out from the halo. A very clear voice said, "What a disappointment. I was just having fun, and you actually came to expose me." Hearing that, Luo Fan's eyes revealed a look of understanding. "As expected, you really do have intelligence. So you were tricking me before?" The voice in the halo shouted. Luo Fan only smiled and said, "Tricking you? Of course not. You have intelligence. This is the conclusion that I deduced directly from the changes that you revealed. But there are many facts to back it up." The clear and tender voice was still extremely unhappy and said, "Humph. In short, you couldn't be sure at all, but now you're sure because of my words. This is a trick. I'm very unhappy. If you say so, then so be it. Now, let's talk about your matters. What exactly are you? Why did you help Kai Fu suppress my luck? Luo Fan said indifferently. The tender and clear voice said directly, I can't be bothered with you. You don't think that I can't destroy you, do you? Luo Fan said indifferently. Although this halo was mysterious, it was only a halo after all. Compared to a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure that had been fused with the holy will, it was not comparable at all. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted to destroy this halo, although it would be a little troublesome, it would only be a little troublesome. In the end, it would not even take a few years to destroy this halo. As Luo Fan spoke, the heavenly cauldron of the divine court naturally appeared to cooperate. An unparalleled power instantly surged towards the halo from all directions, slowly suppressing it from all sides, causing the voice that came from the halo to suddenly scream. Then, an unparalleled counterforce appeared continuously, frantically blocking the surrounding power that was surging towards it. The counterforce of the halo itself was naturally extremely powerful. During this process, it easily destroyed all the power, causing the power to be continuously consumed during this process. Finally, it dissipated when it was about to hit the halo. Just as the voice in the halo became smug, a power that was 10 times stronger than before came from all directions. After this power that was 10 times stronger was a power that was 100 times stronger, then a power that was 1,000 times stronger, then a power that was 10,000 times stronger, and so on and so forth, layer upon layer. The number could even be counted in the thousands. This terrifying scene finally made the halo let out a scream. Just the first wave of power that was only a normal multiple was already about to break through the halo's defense. Thousands of layers of power that were at least 10 times stronger surged towards it. One could imagine how shocking it was. How could the spiritual consciousness in the halo withstand it? As such, it was no wonder that the spiritual consciousness in the halo screamed loudly. Luo Fan stood there with an indifferent look on his face. He quietly watched the ring of light scream, but he didn't stop the layers of terrifying power. He just kept sending these power towards the ring of light, shattering the layers of shock force that burst out of the ring of light and went straight towards the body of the ring of light. No matter how sturdy and powerful the halo itself was, it could not withstand the thousands of layers of power that were stacked on top of each other. Perhaps the first layer of power might not be able to shatter the halo. The second layer might not be able to shatter it. The third layer might not be able to shatter it. But the fourth layer, the fifth layer, the 1,000th layer would definitely be able to shatter it. It could be said that at this moment, the fate of the halo's destruction was already right in front of it. At this moment, the halo finally shouted, Stop, stop, stop. I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you everything. Please don't shatter me. Seeing the halo yield, Luo Fan smiled, but he did not stop. He directly destroyed all the counterforce of the halo. The spiritual consciousness in the halo kept screaming and begging. When the power finally broke through the layers of barriers and was about to touch the halo, it stopped. The halo of wisdom shrieked because it felt that it was about to perish in front of it. After screaming for a while, it realized that Luo Fan had stopped moving at the last moment. Finally, it stopped screaming out of fear and gasped for breath. That was so dangerous. I almost peed my pants. The spiritual consciousness shouted. Luo Fan could not be bothered to participate in this kind of mindless nonsense. He calmly said, You know what answer I need? Tell me now. The spiritual consciousness was stunned. After a while, it said, I'm the main character's halo? Didn't you want to capture me because you knew about me? Luo Fan frowned. Main character's halo? There's actually a main character's halo in this world. That's right. I'm the main character's halo. However, I'm just a miniature main character's halo. Its range of influence is limited to this part of the sea in this world. Its power can only affect beings below the sage level. It's not powerful at all. Otherwise, it wouldn't have fallen into your hands so easily. The halo said, There's actually a main character's halo in this world. Luo Fan suddenly felt as if his worldview had been turned upside down again. However, he recalled the use of this halo. He recalled the effect of the suppression of luck. Luo Fan had to admit it. That was indeed the effect of the main character's halo. Only a living being like a main character could encounter all kinds of trials and troubles, constantly benefiting from misfortune, turning the things that caused him a lot of trouble into benefits for himself. He might even be able to understand the mysteries that he needed to understand the most. Besides the miniature main character's halo, what other main character's halos are there? There are 4 main characters' halos: miniature, medium, large, and super. Together with my miniature main character's halo, there are 5 in total. Among them, the miniature main character's halo can only affect beings below the sage level. Its range of influence is only a part of the sea. Therefore, in almost every world, there are many miniature main characters' halos. Above this, there are also miniature main characters' halos. Although I don't want to admit it, the miniature main character's halo is much stronger than mine. Not only can its range of influence include a world, but its limit of influence can even reach the level of a sage-level existence. The miniature main character's halo said. Hearing this, Luo Fan was shocked. The miniature main character's halo was already the main character of a world, and it could affect all beings below the sage level. Then, how terrifying would the medium, large, and super main characters' halos be? Luo Fan directly asked his own question as soon as he thought of it. The medium main character's halo's range of influence is the 10 perfect worlds that are connected to each other. Its limit of influence is also the sage level. The miniature main character's halo answered. Wait, the miniature main character's halo has already consolidated and can affect sages. Why is the medium main character's halo still only able to affect sages? Isn't that the same? There's no improvement? Luo Fan asked with a frown. Of course it's different. Although the miniature main character's halo can affect sages, it can only affect the sages when they step into the world. As long as the sages leave the world, they will naturally be free from the effect. But the medium main character's halo is different. As long as there is a connection between luck and sages, regardless of whether they are in the world or not, they will be affected. This kind of improvement is a qualitative improvement. There is no comparison between the two. The miniature main character's halo said. His tone, however, was rather excited. Although Luo Fan was doubting the difference in power between the miniature main character's halo and the medium main character's halo, seriously speaking, it was far from the miniature main character's halo. He shouldn't be so excited. However, just like how a person's ancestors would definitely be angry when they were scolded, when Luo Fan talked about the medium and small main character's halos, it was as if he was denying its direction of growth and its goal. It would be strange if it wasn't excited. However, after hearing the miniature main character's halo's description, Luo Fan already understood some things that he couldn't understand before. Chapter 1408. In that case, a perfect world can only have a small protagonist halo. Luo Fan asked. Of course not. Many small protagonist halos can exist in any perfect world, but generally speaking, there won't be more than 100. Among them, the larger the perfect world, the more possible small protagonist halos there are. Those who have these small protagonist halos are people blessed by luck, able to turn misfortune into fortune, misfortune into fortune, misfortune into fortune, and so on, the small protagonist halo said. Luo Fan suddenly realized, I see, it's like there might be several protagonists in a world. Exactly. The small protagonist halo's voice seemed a bit relaxed. Then, can the protagonist halo be transferred? Luo Fan suddenly asked. Of course, but it's very difficult. For example, in my current situation, how do I get the protagonist halo? You need to find a world that belongs to you in the long river of luck, and then merge me with the world. As the rules of the world circulate, I will finally return to my place. In the end, it will take tens of thousands of years to completely merge with the world. If it's a small protagonist halo, it's even more difficult. To truly merge with the world, it will take at least millions of years. As for those above the medium protagonist halo, I don't know. The small protagonist halo said. That doesn't seem difficult. You just need to enter that world and wait for time to pass, right? Luo Fan said. Of course it's not that easy. Do you think it's that easy to put me into a world of luck? As the key that can affect all worlds of luck, it will repel any world of luck. If you want to put me into a world of luck, it will take a lot of effort. Do you think it's easy? The small protagonist Halo sounded like it was looking at a country bumpkin. Luo Fan didn't care about that. He continued to ask, since your small protagonist Halo has intelligence, then it can definitely grow. How can I make you grow into a small or even more advanced protagonist Halo? Hearing Luo Fan's question, the small protagonist Halo suddenly paused, then said excitedly, "You want to help me grow? Just asking." "If it's simple, it's not impossible," Luo Fan said. "It's very simple. As long as I can devour other miniature protagonist auras, I can continue to grow. So, hurry up and nurture me. I can pass on all the knowledge of my main character aura to you, if you want. I can also integrate into your luck world and make you the main character." The miniature main character Halo shouted in joy. Hearing this, Luo Fan sneered, "Devouring is indeed very simple. This is indeed very simple. If you can capture me, then you can also capture the other main character Halos. As long as I use the same method to capture other Halos and fuse them into my body, I can continue to grow. With this method, as long as there were 1,000 of them, I will be able to grow into a mini protagonist Halo. If I can find 1,000,000, I can grow it into a medium-sized main character Halo. If I can find 1,000,000,000, I can grow it into a large-scale main character Halo. If I can find 1,000,000,000,000, I can grow it into a super main character Halo. Isn't it simple? 1,000, and you say it's that simple?" Luo Fan frowned. "It's very simple. You have to see the benefits of having a mini protagonist Halo. This is a powerful existence that can make sages help you unconditionally. If you can obtain such a main character Halo, your chances of becoming a sage will increase by at least 100 times, or even 1,000 times. At that time, even if you can't become a sage, becoming the pinnacle existence below sages is definitely not a problem. Such benefits can be achieved by collecting 1,000 mini protagonist Halos. Isn't that easy? And a mini protagonist Halo is already like that. A medium-sized protagonist Halo is even more powerful. If you have a medium-sized protagonist Halo, then all the perfect worlds that are connected to this perfect world, or even the main characters in the big world, will be able to help you unconditionally. At that time, becoming a sage is almost certain, and this can be achieved by collecting 1,000,000 mini protagonist Halos. Isn't this countless times easier than using other methods to prove one's Tao? The miniature protagonist Halo's voice seemed to be extremely fanatical at this time. When Luo Fan heard this, he unknowingly admitted that what the miniature protagonist Halo said made sense. Anything that can help in becoming a sage, it has its own value to pursue. If one can guarantee to become a sage, collecting 1,000,000 mini protagonist Halos is nothing. Compared to the rewards, the difficulty and danger are not worth mentioning. However, there must be a precondition. That is, it is possible for me to find 1,000,000 mini protagonist Halos. Sages can really be affected by the mini protagonist Halo? Luo Fan suddenly asked. Of course. The mini protagonist Halo seemed to have seen Luo Fan's interest and hurriedly shouted, "Oomph!" Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. In an instant, the power of the heavenly cauldron of the divine court suddenly converged from all directions and directly bombarded the miniature protagonist Halo before it could react. In an instant, the Halo shook violently. From within came the shrill scream of the Halo's spiritual intelligence. "Why are you hitting me? If you break me, you won't get anything," the mini protagonist Halo shouted. Luo Fan said calmly, "Even I want to break free from the control of the river of luck. I don't believe that those sages don't know about the existence of the river of luck and don't want to break free from the control of the river of luck. Of course not. However, the river of luck is divided into layers. What you are sensing now is only the second layer of the river of luck. After this layer, there is still the third, fourth, and fifth layer of the river of luck. After breaking free from the second layer of the river of luck, you will still be under the control of the third, fourth, and other layers of the river of luck. and the sages can only break free from the second layer of the River of Luck at most. As for the deeper layers of the River of Luck, they may be able to sense them, but they can't break free no matter what. Just like now, you can't break free from the control of the second layer of the River of Luck no matter what. The mini-protagonist Halo shouted. Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but be slightly stunned. The second layer, the third layer, the fourth layer, he murmured as a bitter smile gradually appeared on his face. Although he had expected that he would still be under a deeper layer of control after breaking free from the River of Luck, he still felt an indescribable sense of despair when the mini-protagonist Halo said it so clearly. Fortunately, after all, his Taoist heart was firm, so he quickly cut off this negative emotion and his expression returned to normal. How many layers are there in the River of Luck? Luo Fan asked. I don't know that either. All I know is that there are only 6 layers. Some people say that there are only 6 layers, but none of them are really authoritative. The mini-protagonist Halo's words revealed a rare trace of confusion. Obviously, even the protagonist Halo, who had a deep understanding of the River of Luck, could not see the River of Luck clearly and could not understand the true appearance of the River of Luck. 6 layers. In that case, the first layer should be the River of Luck that is limited to heaven and earth and belongs to a part of the Great Tao. And the second layer should be the River of Luck that surpasses the perfect heaven and earth and connects all the perfect heaven and earth and big heaven and earth that I can sense now. That's right. The remaining 4 levels correspond to the small main character aura, medium main character aura, large main character aura, and super main character aura. The miniature main character aura said. If that's the case, doesn't that mean that if you upgrade your mini-protagonist Halo, you will break free from the River of Luck that I can sense now and jump into the third layer of the River of Luck? And you will be able to affect the sages who are still unable to break free from the third layer of the River of Luck? Luo Fan frowned. Exactly. If I can upgrade my mini-protagonist Halo to the medium-protagonist Halo, I will naturally be able to jump into the fourth layer of the River of Luck. By then, I might be able to affect the powerful beings who are one realm higher than the sages. The mini-protagonist Halo said with some longing. Beings who are one realm higher than the sages? What kind of beings are they? The mini-protagonist Halo said directly. How would I know? The most powerful beings I've seen so far are only sages. How would I know what's above the sages? Luo Fan had hoped that the mini-protagonist Halo would tell him something he did not know. He did not expect to get such an answer. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. Have you seen the third layer of the River of Luck? Of course not. The mini-protagonist Halo said matter-of-factly. I see. What a pity. Luo Fan sighed softly and said, Do you have the ability to sense other mini-protagonist Halos? Of course. Just like how normal beings have eyes to see their own kind, we, the protagonist Halo, naturally have the corresponding means to sense each other. The mini-protagonist Halo said proudly. Then why don't you send it? Could it be that you don't want to evolve and sublimate? Luo Fan said indifferently. You agree? The mini-protagonist Halo was overjoyed. Of course not. I haven't seen the power of the God Art, and I haven't seen how difficult it is. Why would I agree to something like this? Luo Fan looked at the main character Halo like it was an idiot. The mini-protagonist Halo was stunned by Luo Fan's words. After a while, it said, What's there to understand? This kind of thing will only benefit you. Do you still need to think about it? Don't talk nonsense. Send over all the God Arts and all the memories you have. Luo Fan frowned. Although this miniature protagonist Halo was unwilling, it was, after all, a sentient being that knew how to cherish life and was afraid of death. In a situation where Luo Fan could destroy it at any time, it quickly yielded. Okay, as it said that, rays of light came out from the Halo. These rays of light were like physical objects. They gathered in the void in front of Luo Fan. In the blink of an eye, they formed a light of information. Contained within this light of information was the infinite memories of the miniature protagonist Halo. As the light surged out, The mini protagonist Halo's light dimmed slightly. It took a while for it to recover. All of my memories are here. You have to properly cultivate the divine abilities inside. That way, you'll be able to find the other main character halos and fuse them with this main character halo. I've been so sincere to you. Don't be tempted by the other mini protagonist halos. Luo Fan looked at the information. He was too lazy to care about this mini protagonist halo. He grabbed it, and the light of information was instantly absorbed into his hand. As the light of information entered his hand, endless information flowed into his mind through this light of information. He instantly sensed it. Contained within this information were the endless memories of the existence of the miniature protagonist's halo. This was the time that the mini protagonist halo had existed. Who knew how many billions of trillion years had passed? Its history could even be traced back to the moment when life was born in this universe. However, in these endless years, this mini protagonist halo had not seen anything in the world. It had always been in the river of luck. All the scenes it had seen were scenes in the river of luck. In these endless years, this mini protagonist halo had once attached itself to tens of billions of luck worlds. Among them, the living beings that it had attached itself to had lived for at least tens of millions of years. The one with the highest achievement had even reached the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. This time, if it hadn't been captured by Luo Fan, it would have attached itself to the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. At the very least, it would have been able to reach the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. Among the hundreds of millions of living beings, not all of them had died. Many of them were still alive somewhere in the Earth's universe. This was all because the mini protagonist halo felt that it could no longer gain anything from attaching itself to their luck worlds. Thus it left them. In these endless years, this mini protagonist halo had followed the characteristics of the river of luck. According to the characteristics of the main character halo, it had created countless god arts and techniques. These magical abilities, these magical methods, were completely different from all the magical abilities that Luo Fan had ever known. It was created by using Luck Dao, controlling Luck Dao, attacking Luck Dao, searching for the corresponding halos, attacking the corresponding halos, and so on and so forth. Any one of these countless god arts. They were comparable to the god art that the bookmaster had taught him. Among them, there were quite a few that were comparable to the god arts that Luo Fan had created to capture the main character halo. Facing such a boundless magical power, Luo Fan first showed a smile on his face, then his brows furrowed. There are so many restrictions on finding other god arts. In this case, not to mention finding a million mini protagonist halos, it's impossible to find 1,000. Among these god arts, there were hundreds of god arts that could find other halos. However, among these hundreds of god arts, the best could only find whether there was a main character halo in other luck worlds through the connection between luck worlds. The worst could only be limited to a certain world. With such a magical ability, even if Luo Fan were to display it, it would be a matter of luck if he wanted to find a protagonist halo. If he wanted to collect tens of thousands of halos, how long would that take? How could Luo Fan be satisfied? This is a little troublesome, but it shouldn't be a big problem to find a main character halo after spending some time. The mini protagonist halo said. Spend some time? Not a big problem. How long do you think it would take to find a main character halo, even with this most powerful god art? 1,000 years. At least 1,000 years to find a mini protagonist halo. Even if it was the smallest, it would take 1,000,000 years to find 1,000 miniature protagonist halos. To find 1,000,000 mini protagonist halos that could make me a saint, it would take 1,000,000,000 years without rest. Do you think I have a time to waste 1,000,000,000 years on this? The mini protagonist halo said in surprise. 1,000,000,000 years to make you a saint? Isn't that a good thing? For the mini protagonist halo that had existed since Pina was born on Earth, 1,000,000,000 years was like a moment for an ordinary person. How could he feel that this period of time was long? Luo Fan finally knew how big the difference in their concept of time was. He sighed helplessly, but he didn't want to argue with it anymore. However, he temporarily dismissed the idea of cultivating this mini-protagonist halo into a mini-protagonist halo. If Luo Fan wanted to do it, he would do it to the best of his ability. The probability of any cultivator becoming a saint was extremely small. Even if it was increased by 100 or 1,000 times, the probability of becoming a saint, it wasn't big. Therefore, for Luo Fan, upgrading this mini-protagonist halo to a mini-protagonist halo was obviously not enough to satisfy him. If he wanted to do it, he would definitely have to upgrade this main character halo to a medium protagonist halo. And if that was the case, he would have to waste 1 billion years to find the main characters of a certain area and find a way to get their main character halos. Not to mention whether there were so many main characters in the entire Earth universe. Even if there were, wasting so many years to find them was obviously not worth it. Now, he understood the essence of cultivation. He was at the juncture of advancing by leaps and bounds. With this 1 billion years, he might even have the chance to become a saint. Why would he still need this medium protagonist halo to get other saints to help him unconditionally? Moreover, there was another more important point. That was, he was pursuing to transcend the control of this long river of luck. If he integrated this main character halo into his world of luck, wouldn't it instead deepen his connection with this long river of luck? That was his ultimate goal. Wouldn't it be going in the opposite direction? It was because of these considerations that Luo Fan just now gave up the idea of cultivating this mini-protagonist halo. What's there to sigh about? This is such a good opportunity. As long as you find some mini-protagonist halos, you can become a saint. Isn't this the ultimate pursuit of you cultivators? Now that the path to heaven is right in front of you, why aren't you willing to spend some time to work hard? That mini-protagonist Halo's crisp voice sounded extremely indignant. I still need to think about it. Luo Fan said lightly. What else is there to think about? I've given you all my memories. Why don't you carry out what you said before? The mini-protagonist Halo became even more indignant. Luo Fan frowned. Be quiet, don't disturb me. With that said, he raised his hand and slapped down. In an instant, endless power struck, causing the mini-protagonist Halo to shake endlessly, causing the spirit in the mini-protagonist Halo to scream continuously. After a while, everything returned to normal. After recovering, the mini-protagonist Halo said unhappily, "You cultivators really can't be trusted." At this time, Luo Fan had already dispersed his consciousness body, and his consciousness returned to his main body. After his consciousness returned, he began to close his eyes, studying and comprehending the memories of the mini-protagonist Halo in his heart. The subtlety of these divine abilities was secondary. For Luo Fan, the most important thing was that these divine abilities revealed a concept and system that was completely different from what he cultivated. The mini-protagonist Halo itself was not a cultivator, and the world it lived in was not the normal real world, but the illusory long river of luck. Under such circumstances, the worldview of this mini-protagonist Halo was different from the worldview of all living beings in reality. At least, it was different from the worldview of all living beings that Luo Fan knew. This was not because the realm of the mini-protagonist Halo was so profound that it needed to sort out its own unique worldview to be able to improve perfectly, but because of its natural environment. Under such a worldview, the divine abilities and techniques that it created were naturally based on such a worldview, and the various mysteries within them were also elaborating such a worldview from different perspectives. Although this worldview was incompatible with Luo Fan's worldview of laws, the mystery revealed in it allowed Luo Fan to perfect the worldview of laws and was able to be enlightened on the use of the worldview of laws. The more Luo Fan comprehended it, the more he felt that he gained. Chapter 1409. Among the divine abilities transmitted by the miniature protagonist Halo, Luo Fan saw a divine ability called True Luck. This divine ability was the only one among all the divine abilities that didn't require much modification to be used on a living being. It was completely different from the countless divine abilities and cultivation techniques that could only be used in the River of Luck and the Luck Dao worlds. True Luck? Isn't that something that only protagonists in novels have? What's the difference between its effects and those in novels? Luo Fan thought to himself. This magical power of true luck was similar to what Luo Fan had seen in those endless novels before he transmigrated. The protagonists of any world would have an attribute. Suddenly seeing such a familiar name, he unknowingly developed an interest in experimenting. At Luo Fan's level, once an idea arose in his heart, he would naturally put it into action. With a thought, he stood up and took a step forward. In an instant, he had left his cave abode. In the blink of an eye, he had traveled hundreds of millions of miles and arrived on a nearby island. Although the absolute distance between this island and the island where he had been cultivating in seclusion was not small, in terms of the scale of the vast demon realm, such a distance could only be regarded as close to this island. As such, he was also affected by that island. The number of cultivators among them was countless times more than the number of normal cultivators. This was a matter of course. For the island where Luo Fan was cultivating in seclusion, the other cultivators were not strong except for those at the level 9 pseudo-sage realm. However, for ordinary cultivators, they were not strong at all. An existence at the level of a pseudo-saint was already an absolutely supreme existence. There were so many pseudo-sage-level cultivators gathered on that island. For ordinary cultivators, it was definitely a holy land for cultivation. If any pseudo-sage-level existence was in a good mood, they could give them some pointers. It was enough for them to enjoy endlessly. Under such circumstances, this island was naturally very attractive to European cultivators. Due to the gathering of many cultivators, the originally peaceful island had become extremely chaotic after thousands of years of change. Even on the island where Luo Fan was cultivating in seclusion. With so many level 9 pseudo-sages suppressing the island, there would often be vendettas, fights, and scoldings. Furthermore, this was an island without any truly powerful cultivators suppressing everything. The presence of so many cultivators directly disrupted the original order. The secular order on the island, which had been formed over countless years, was thrown into chaos. Countless wars, battles, killings, and grudges occurred on this island at every moment. A faint murderous aura enveloped the entire island. Luo Fan had only come here to experiment with the cultivation method he wanted to experiment with, not to show off his strength. Therefore, when he came here, he hid everything. Even level 9 pseudo-sage-level existences would not be able to discover his existence. Floating in the air, Luo Fan could feel the faintly discernible baleful aura condensing above the island. He could also instantly hear the countless sounds of screams, slaughter, and roars coming from all over the island. If I want to see the effect of true luck, I'll have to find the unluckiest, and most fated creature to try it out. Luo Fan thought to himself. With a sweep of his perception, he instantly determined his target. With a light step, he arrived at a location in an extremely ordinary country on the island. It was a rather prosperous city. The person chosen by Luo Fan was a beggar in the slums of the city, given Luo Fan's magic power. He glanced at the beggar and saw his past, future, and even his future fate. Everything was reflected in his eyes, without any reservation. He could even see his luck world above the river of luck path through him. He knew that this person did not have any halo, nor did he have the fate of a protagonist. He did not even have the fate of a supporting character. He was completely an ordinary person. This is it, Luo Fan thought to himself. He casually pointed his finger, and a magical ability of true luck was directly cast on the beggar who was half lying against the wall. Instantly, a faint, invisible fluorescent light flashed across the beggar's body. In a trance, his luck path world seemed to have changed slightly. Immediately after, the surrounding laws and principles suddenly distorted slightly, producing an extremely mysterious and unbelievable effect. His luck suddenly increased so much. True luck is indeed incredible. Luo Fan could not help but be surprised when he saw the changes on the beggar's body. The various changes on the beggar's body were clearly the result of the sudden increase in luck. At this moment, a passerby suddenly waved at the beggar and said, "Hey, that beggar, come over here." Hearing that, the beggar looked around and pointed at himself. The passerby nodded impatiently and said, "That's you. Come over. I have something good for you." The strongest cultivator in the city was only an ordinary itinerant immortal. It was impossible for them to discover Luo Fan's existence. At this moment, Luo Fan stood there. He did not want to be seen by anyone. Neither the passerby nor the beggar could see him. This did not require any illusion or magic power. As long as he willed it, the world would naturally distort the perception of other living beings, preventing them from seeing Luo Fan's existence. Luo Fan looked at the scene in front of him with great interest. He wanted to see how much benefit the beggar could get because of true luck. After confirming that the passerby was calling him, the beggar was overjoyed. He quickly got up and ran to the passerby and said, "Mister, what do you need me to do?" The passerby was irritated by the beggar's smell. He frowned and took out a silver ingot. He said, "Go and send a message for me. These 5 taels of silver are yours." "No problem, no problem." The beggar's eyes were already glued to the silver ingot. He quickly agreed. The passerby directly threw the silver ingot to the beggar. The beggar hurriedly caught it. He blew on the silver ingot and wiped it hard on his body. Then, he looked at the silver light on the silver ingot with an infatuated gaze. When the passerby saw this, his eyes were filled with disgust. However, he still said, "Did you see that restaurant?" "Of course I saw it. But, mister, I can't go to that restaurant. The waiters in that restaurant look down on us. Normally, if we take half a step inside, we will be beaten up," the beggar hurriedly said. The passerby frowned and threw another silver ingot to the beggar. He said, "Is this okay?" "Yes, yes." The beggar was smiling so widely that his eyes could not be seen. When Luran saw this, he said, "Go to the 2nd floor of that restaurant. Find a red-faced, burly man there. Tell him that it's midnight tonight." "Red-faced, burly man, it's midnight tonight." "Okay, I'll remember it. Go quickly. I've given you benefits. If you don't deliver the message, you'll have to deal with the consequences." The passerby warned him one last time. "Don't worry, mister. Absolutely no problem. If I delay mister's matter, my lowly life, mister can take it." The beggar was also desperate. He patted his chest and said, Luo Fan looked at this experience and frowned. "It can't be just these 10 taels of silver, right? The effect of this true luck is too bad." Luo Fan, who was in disbelief, decided to continue watching. After the beggar left the passerby, he came to the front of the restaurant and barged in. He came to the 2nd floor without any obstruction and found the red-faced, burly man. This restaurant did not have any obstructions. There was no one who looked down on him. At this moment, it seemed that the beggar's words were just a lie. He was just lying to the passerby. Luo Fan followed the beggar slowly. He quietly watched how the beggar easily earned that ingot of silver, but his heart did not waver. When the beggar saw the red-faced man, he could tell that the red-faced man was a powerful martial artist. He immediately said, "Hero, I'm not afraid of you." He immediately said, "Hero, someone asked me to pass a message to you just now." "Oh, who sent the message? What message?" The red-faced, burly man frowned. "It's a young mister in his 20s dressed in green. The message he sent is tonight at midnight," the beggar said. "Tonight at midnight? What tonight at midnight?" "This message only has these 4 words. Is there no other content?" The red-faced, burly man was confused. The beggar was also surprised. Looking at the passerby's expression, it was obvious that the red-faced, burly man understood everything when he heard these 4 words. He already knew what they wanted to communicate. Why did the red-faced, burly man look confused at this time? However, although he was surprised, he also knew what he should care about and what he shouldn't care about. Thus, he shook his head and said, "Indeed, it only has these 4 words. As for the specific meaning, I don't know. Now that the message has been delivered, there is nothing else for me to do. I will take my leave." After saying that, he turned around and was about to leave. At this time, the red-faced, burly man suddenly said, Wait, you can't leave. The beggar heard that the tone of these words was not right. He showed a nervous expression and said, "Hero, I am just a messenger. Come with me to find the person who passed a message," the red-faced, burly man said. He grabbed the beggar and rushed out of the window a few steps away. The beggar let out a sharp scream and easily landed on the ground. "Where did you see that person?" the red-faced, burly man said. At this time, the beggar still hadn't recovered from his previous panic. For a moment, he didn't understand what the red-faced, burly man was saying. Where's the person who asked you to pass on the message?" The red-faced, burly man impatiently squeezed slightly, and the beggar screamed in pain. I don't know where that person went," he shouted. "Which direction?" the red-faced, burly man said impatiently. Of course, he knew that the person had left after asking the beggar to pass on the message. It was impossible for that person to stay there and wait for him to find him. The reason why he wanted to search carefully now was that he was unwilling to give up. Impatiently, the red-faced, burly man couldn't help but pour some internal force into the beggar to calm him down quickly. At this moment, a crackling sound suddenly came from the beggar's body. Amidst this sound, the conception and governing vessels in the beggar's body suddenly connected, making the last barrier for the beggar to step into the Sciention realm suddenly disappear. The red-faced, burly man was suddenly dumbfounded. This beggar was clearly just an ordinary person without the slightest bit of internal energy. How did he manage to open up the governor and conception vessels, which are the most difficult for ordinary warriors to open up, by pouring a small amount of internal energy into his body? This was a barrier that he hadn't opened up until now. Discovering such an anomaly, the red-faced, burly man suddenly lost interest in the person who passed on the message to him. He looked at the beggar with an extremely strange expression. The moment the red-faced, burly man poured internal force into the beggar, he felt his arm heat up. Then his body trembled, and the internal force was suddenly sucked into the axis in front and behind of him. Suddenly, it formed a cycle and completely connected the axis in front and back. It made his whole body feel a slight vibration, and a faint warmth was constantly emitted from it. His whole body and mind were incomparably carefree, and there was an indescribable beauty surging up. This caused him to fall into a trance. At this time, the red-faced man's face appeared in front of him and stared at him, causing him to be startled. He was suddenly shocked and said, "Hero, what are you doing? Kid, you're in luck." With that, the red-faced, burly man suddenly jumped onto the roof with the beggar. They kept jumping and shuttling forward, and finally directly went out of the city. As the beggar screamed, they came to a valley outside the city. There was a small wooden house here, and there were all kinds of flowers and plants. And in between, there was an extremely elegant middle-aged man busy among the flowers and plants. "Old Wong, look what I brought you," the red-faced, burly man shouted as soon as he stepped into the valley. The middle-aged man glanced over and suddenly frowned slightly, saying, "Why did you bring a little beggar? This is not an ordinary beggar. You will know once you check his body," the red-faced, burly man shouted. The middle-aged man frowned, pulled the bewildered beggar over, and looked him up and down. The more he looked, the brighter his eyes became. Then, he pulled the beggar's left hand and directly felt his pulse. After a while, he said, "There is actually such a thing. A person without any internal force can actually open the conception and governing vessels. He is not just a martial arts genius. He is simply a monster. This talisman does not meet your requirements, can be passed on to you," the red-faced burly man said proudly. "It can't be more suitable. I, Wang Wudi, have been invincible in the martial arts world for more than 40 years, but I could not set foot on the road of cultivation, was not valued by the immortals, and could not live a long life. I did not expect that I would finally be able to cultivate the method of longevity that I created. The heavens are really kind to me." The middle-aged man laughed loudly. "Congratulations. I did not expect that after decades of searching, you would finally find him today." The red-faced burly man was quite happy. The two laughed for a while, and then Wang Wudi asked, "This person is so talented and beautiful. and there are even immortals in the city. How did a straightforward person like you find him?" Only then did the red-faced man tell him what had happened. Hearing this, Wang Wudi also had an incredulous look on his face. He carefully examined the beggar again, and after a while, he said, "There are too many incredible things in the world." After a while, Wang Wudi said to the beggar, "I am Wang Wudi. Little guy, are you willing to take me as your master?" The beggar's life in the city was precarious, and he didn't know what to eat next. When he suddenly heard that someone wanted to take him as a disciple, even if he was a cripple, he would definitely kneel down and kowtow. Moreover, this person's tone was so arrogant. He actually said that he was invincible, and he even took the red-faced man with astonishing abilities as a friend. Naturally, he couldn't refuse. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed a few times, shouting, "Disciple Go Sheng greets Master." "Good, good, good." Wang Wudi was overjoyed. After a few words, he realized what the beggar's name was. So he said, "The name Go Sheng is really vulgar. How can my disciple have such a name? From today onwards, your surname is Wang, and your name is Changsheng." The beggar, or rather, when Changsheng heard this, he was overjoyed, saying, "Thank you, Master. From today onwards, disciple will be called Changsheng Wang." "All right, one of you is taking in a disciple, and the other is taking in a master. I don't want to disturb you anymore. I will leave first." After saying that, he did not wait for Wang Wudi to reply, and directly used Qigong to rush out of the valley. Wang Wudi did not ask him to stay, and helped Changsheng up, saying, "Go wash up first. I will talk to you later." Changsheng respectfully agreed. This place was very unfamiliar to Changsheng. Naturally, he needed Wang Wudi to do everything for him. Thus, Wang Wudi pulled Changsheng to the stream behind the wooden hut, letting him wash up there. As for himself, he returned to the wooden hut and searched for a set of clothes that he could not wear. They were busy there. Luo Fan quietly stood in the middle of the valley. So it was like this. True luck is really powerful. Seeing the beggar suddenly change from dog leftovers to Changsheng Wang, Luo Fan could not help but sigh. Although Wang Wudi was only a martial artist, compared to the current Luo Fan, as long as Luo Fan focused, his gaze would be enough to completely crush him. But it had to be said, in the secular world, Wang Wudi was an extremely powerful existence. In a wuxiao world, he would definitely be on the level of a monk sweeping the floor. Not to mention the beggar, even for an ordinary person, to be taken in as a disciple by Wang Wudi and obtain his legacy was definitely a great thing. It could be said that the moment the beggar was taken in as a disciple by Wang Wudi, his fate had changed completely. When Luo Fan looked at the beggar before, he had already seen the beggar's future clearly. In the future he saw, there was no scene of him being taken in as a disciple by Wang Wudi. In this way, it was clear that the beggar's change was because of Luo Fan using true luck on him. After knowing the great effects of true luck, Luo Fan suddenly became curious. How far can true luck go? Because of this curiosity, he developed an interest in observing immortal Wang's fate a step further. After Changsheng, Wang finished washing up. Although he was not a handsome youth, he no longer had the wretched look he had when he was a beggar. He could be considered a relatively handsome youth. Wang Wudi didn't know what itch this appearance had tickled, but after seeing Wang Changsheng's true appearance, Wang Wudi treated Wang Changsheng even better. In the following days, he didn't even really test immortal Wang's temperament. Already passing down the cultivation method, he created with great difficulty to immortal Wang, to the extent where he even used his own powerful inner force to assist in the circulation of this cultivation method, allowing him to break through the difficulties of this cultivation method one after another. In the end, in a short 3 years, he broke through the Xiantian realm and reached the limit of the martial world, reaching a height that was only one level lower than Wang Wudi. With this level of cultivation, he could be considered a top expert in the martial arts world, although any cultivator could easily take care of such an expert. In a short 3 years, he went from a beggar to a martial world expert. Such an experience was like a dream to Changsheng Wang. Even Luo Fan, who had been watching Changsheng Wang grow, saw Changsheng Wang pinch himself dozens of times to make sure he was not dreaming. On this day, Wang Wudi summoned Changsheng Wang and said, "Disciple, I have taught you the method of seeking longevity through martial arts. You already know the crux of it. I have nothing more to teach you. If you stay here, your cultivation speed will become extremely slow. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to break through the limits of a martial artist before you reach your peak. Tomorrow, you will leave this valley and travel the world." When Changsheng Wang heard this, he was shocked and said, "No, disciple will protect master. Master is Wang Wudi, who in a martial world does not know how powerful I am. Why would I need your protection? Tomorrow morning, leave." Wang Wudi waved his hand and said. Chapter 14:10. After Wang Changsheng left Wang Wudi, he began to travel around the various countries on the island. Along the way, he encountered endless dangers, fortuitous encounters, and encounters with beautiful women. It was as if he obtained benefits along the way. The inheritance left behind by a martial arts legend from hundreds of years ago, the magical item left behind by a cultivator from thousands of years ago, and the importance of a martial arts family. These kinds of things were completely the treatment of the main character in a novel. During this entire process, Luo Fan had been secretly following Immortal Wang, watching him go through one fortuitous encounter after another. He could feel the changes in Immortal Wang's true luck during this process. Through these changes, he carefully experienced the various effects of the true luck and deduced the concepts behind it that would be of great help to Luo Fan's worldview. One day, Luo Fan suddenly frowned, because he suddenly felt that the true luck he had added to Wang Changsheng had suddenly undergone a change that hadn't been there before. It was as if an invisible force was suppressing this magic. Suddenly, the magic began to shrink slightly. Why is there such a change? Luo Fan was extremely curious. It had been more than 10 years since Wang Changsheng had left Wang Wudi. And now, because of the various fortuitous encounters in the past 10 years, Wang Changsheng had already created the title of a martial arts legend. He was publicly recognized as the strongest martial arts expert in the surrounding countries. His words could be said to be second only to those of the immortals in the surrounding countries. He was even more useful than the emperors of these countries. As for his own strength, through who knew how many accidents, he had directly broken through the limits of martial arts. Although he hadn't truly obtained immortality, he had broken through the limit of an ordinary person's lifespan and obtained a lifespan of hundreds of years. Over the years, even if the true luck had occasionally changed, it had only produced some inexplicable fluctuations. It had never happened like this before. It was as if it was being oppressed by some power, suddenly shrinking. Now that it had suddenly appeared, he instantly understood that there must be an accident that hadn't appeared before. Luo Fan had a rough understanding of Wang Changsheng's current encounter. He discovered the source of this change. Wang Changsheng was now a martial arts legend, and his fame was several times greater than that of Wang Wudi, who knew how many ambitious young people in the surrounding countries saw him as a goal. They wanted to challenge him. They wanted to make a name for themselves by defeating him. On this day, a young man had come to challenge him. This young man was not even a warrior of the innate realm. Although his strength was not bad compared to that of an ordinary person, compared to Wang Changsheng, the difference was more than 100 times. "I am Zhou He, and I have come to challenge a martial arts legend. I have come to challenge you." This young man was like a newborn calf that didn't fear tigers, directly shouting outside Immortal Wang's manor. His voice was filled with inner force, making it seem especially grand. Not to mention the people in the manor, even those within a radius of several dozen miles would be able to hear him. At this time, Wang Changsheng was in his manor enjoying the happiness of a family with his 12 wives. Suddenly being disturbed by this noise, he couldn't help but be in a bad mood. Normally, he would be challenged almost every few days. However, those challengers would usually respectfully hand over their invitation cards and politely express their desire to seek his guidance. Who would dare to shout so loudly outside the manor of a martial arts legend? Because he was disturbed, Wang Changsheng was in a bad mood. He did not intend to send one of his disciples to chase away the challengers like he had done before. Instead, he intended to teach Zhou He a lesson. Therefore, he asked someone to bring Zhou He to his training ground, while he brought one of his wives to the training ground leisurely. Wang Changxing's eyes lit up when he arrived. For some reason, he felt that Zhou He was a good person when he looked at him. He suddenly felt a strange sense of acknowledgement for the man, and he had unknowingly forgotten about the man's arrogance. Wang Changsheng did not know why, and he only felt that it was fate. However, Luo Fan knew very well that it was the result of his true luck being suppressed. Because the anger in his heart had disappeared, Wang Changxing no longer had any desire to fight, and so he sent one of his disciples to fight Zhou He. Zhou He had come to challenge Wang Changsheng, but Wang Changsheng did not fight, and it was his disciple who did. How could he be satisfied? He immediately made up his mind to teach Wang Changxing's disciple a lesson. He was going to beat Wang Changsheng until he could not take it anymore. Under this type of mentality, his attacks were decisive and forceful, actually easily defeating immortal Wang's disciple. Such a process should have been a slap in the face for Wang Changsheng, and he should have been furious. However, on that day, he was not angry at all. Instead, he thought that the man was quite talented and wanted to take him as a disciple. What happened next was very obvious. Wang Changsheng personally fought and taught Zhou He a lesson with absolute strength. He then said that he wanted to take Zhou He as a disciple and asked for his opinion. Once Zhou He was defeated by Wang Changsheng, he finally understood just how great the difference between him and a true martial artist was. He finally understood the immensity of the world, and he was overjoyed by Wang Changxing's suggestion. He immediately acknowledged Wang Changsheng as his master and became his disciple. This situation is different from Wang Changxing's encounter, but the essence is not much different. Luo Fan watched the two opponents suddenly become master and disciple and thought to himself. Thinking of this, his eyes suddenly lit up. His eyes shined brightly, and the river of luck appeared in his eyes. After that, he used Zhou He's body to travel up to the source, and he instantly found Zhou He's corresponding world of luck in the river of luck. Although the river of luck was divided into layers, each layer of the river of luck was compatible. In other words, even if a living being didn't transcend the first layer of the river of luck, its luck world still existed in the second layer of the river of luck, the third layer of the river of luck, and even higher layers of the river of luck. Therefore, although it was impossible for Zhou He to have the ability to transcend the first level of the river of luck, Luo Fan could still see the existence of his corresponding luck world in the second level of the river of luck. Only when he transcended the second layer of the river of luck would he be unable to find his corresponding luck world in the second layer of the river of luck. As his eyes narrowed, the small that rapidly expanded. In the blink of an eye, it expanded from the original small that into a world that was hundreds of feet wide. After seeing this world, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. In an instant, he found one of the many divine abilities and spells he had obtained from the miniature protagonist Halo. It was the Search Halo's divine ability. With a thought, the power in his body surged. This god art was instantly pushed to the limit and turned into a mirror-like magic treasure. After the magic treasure formed from the divine ability took shape, it trembled slightly. He turned towards the Luck Dao world, corresponding to the Zhou River in the middle of the Luck Dao River. In an instant, countless mysterious lines flashed crazily on the surface of the mirror before quickly disappearing. It looked like a waterfall falling from the sky, like it was pouring out like crazy. After a long time, all the lines on the mirror-like magic treasure disappeared and were replaced by a broken halo. It really does have the protagonist halo. Luo Fan looked at the halo and had a look of realization. When the god art true luck was attached to a creature, it was equivalent to giving that person the protagonist treatment. In other words, it was equivalent to the effect of a knockoff protagonist halo. Under normal circumstances, only the real protagonist halo could suppress the effects of such a magical power. Therefore, when he discovered that the magical power was suppressed, Luo Fan already had a hunch in his heart. Maybe this was the result of Wang Changsheng encountering a protagonist within a certain range. That was the reason why he had to investigate the River of Luck at this moment. With a thought, Luo Fan sent a bit of his consciousness into the world of luck through the three-dimensional talisman he had set up in the world of luck. Then, the world evolved into a body, and he integrated his consciousness into the body. Next, he controlled the body and used the teleportation god art in the River of Luck. In a few dozen breaths, he had teleported a long distance and appeared in the world of luck. He arrived in front of the extremely broken halo that Luo Fan had found with his god art. After arriving here, the creature casually used the divine ability that Luo Fan had created to capture this light ring. With a single grab, the broken light ring was caught in its hand. Luo Fan was taken aback as soon as the halo was in his hand. He was already prepared to bear the terrifying weight of this halo, but he didn't expect that this broken halo was just like an iron ring. Although it was somewhat heavy, it was still a far cry from being heavy. The difference between his expectations and reality almost made Luo Fan throw the broken halo away. Fortunately, his control over his power was superb. He managed to control his power at the last moment and barely stopped the halo without throwing it away. But even so, he still felt extremely uncomfortable. There's actually such a huge difference. Luo Fan frowned and thought to himself. He set up an altar in the world of luck and offered the halo to himself. Through this method, the broken halo was easily transferred to him, and he easily grasped it in his hand. As the halo was removed, Wang Changsheng's true luck instantly returned to its original state. When Wang Changsheng looked at Zhou He again, he didn't feel like they were fated to get along. Instead, he felt that Zhou He was an eyesore. However, since he had already said it, he couldn't go back on his word. Thus, he threw Zhou He to one of his disciples to teach and told him to lay the foundation first. Luo Fan's expression didn't change when he saw the immediate effect. However, he made up his mind to do everything he could to escape the control of the River of Luck. If he was controlled by the River of Luck, he wouldn't be able to control his own mind, emotions, and feelings. This kind of fate was absolutely abhorrent to Luo Fan. After making up his mind, Luo Fan had no interest in staying there any longer. With a thought, he took a step forward and crossed a distance of billions of miles in an instant. He returned to the cave abode he had opened up on the island. After returning to the cave abode, his consciousness wrapped around the broken halo and descended into the divine court heaven cauldron. He arrived above the miniature protagonist halo. Although he hadn't been here for more than a decade, the protagonist halo was still very well behaved. It was just evolving a world inside the divine court heaven cauldron and enjoying itself. However, there was no struggle. There was no such thing as finding a way to escape. Suddenly seeing Luo Fan's arrival, the miniature protagonist halo shook and destroyed the world that it had been playing with for more than a decade. It said with great anticipation, "Have you decided?" These words. Obviously, it was asking if Luo Fan had decided to integrate more of the miniature protagonist halo into his body to increase his level. The one who had the upper hand now was Luo Fan. Whether he answered or not, that was his own business. At this time, Luo Fan obviously wasn't in the mood to answer such a question. Therefore, he just said indifferently, "Let's not talk about this for now. Why don't you take a look at this thing?" As he spoke, the dust-like halo in his hand quickly enlarged. In the blink of an eye, it had enlarged to the size of the miniature protagonist halo. It had grown by who knew how many tens of thousands of times. The moment it saw the broken halo, the miniature protagonist halo couldn't help but be overjoyed and said, "This is the protagonist halo fragment. Give it to me quickly. Give it to me quickly." Before figuring out what was going on, Luo Fan naturally couldn't give the broken halo to the miniature protagonist halo. Therefore, with just a thought, a force directly locked the miniature protagonist halo in place, preventing it from moving, lest it swallow the broken halo while he was not paying attention. Then he asked, "Protagonist halo fragment? What is that? What effect does it have?" After obtaining all the memories of the miniature protagonist Halo, Luo Fan's understanding of the miniature protagonist Halo was incomparably deep. He also had a deep understanding of all the powers it possessed. Under such circumstances, it would be as easy as flipping his hand to restrain this miniature protagonist Halo, although he was just casually letting the Heavenly Cauldron release a wave of power. The effect it produced was much stronger than when he directly used the entire Heavenly Cauldron's power. The miniature protagonist Halo really did struggle wildly as Luo Fan had feared, but under that power, it couldn't break free no matter how hard it tried. After trying for a while, it then helplessly gave up and began to answer Luo Fan's questions honestly. There are two sources of the protagonist Halo fragments. One is the fragments that the protagonist Halo breaks into. The other is the natural evolution of the River of Luck, the prototype of the protagonist Halo. Their effect is the same as the complete protagonist Halo, but there is a huge difference in the effect. Luo Fan didn't care about the miniature protagonist Halo's struggle. This was also because the miniature protagonist Halo's struggle didn't pose any threat to him at all. Instead, it was extremely uncomfortable and in extreme pain. After hearing this answer, he couldn't help but frown. The protagonist Halo can still break? When a miniature protagonist Halo heard this, it said angrily, "Of course it can break. If it won't break, do I still need to be afraid of you?" Hearing this, Luo Fan just remembered how he had threatened this protagonist Halo before. Since this Halo could break, then no matter how impossible it was to break in an environment, as long as enough time passed, there would definitely be some factors that would cause it to break. However, although he knew that it could break, Luo Fan was extremely curious about how the protagonist Halo in the River of Luck would break. After all, the protagonist Halo in the River of Luck was attached to some Luck Dao worlds, and Luck Dao worlds were usually extremely safe. How could it encounter a crisis of breaking? Due to this curiosity, he directly asked, "In the River of Luck, under what circumstances will the protagonist Halo break?" The miniature protagonist Halo paused for a while, then said with some reluctance, "Actually, apart from the protagonist Halo, there are many other Halos. For example, the supporting role Halo, the passerby Halo, the brilliant Halo, the intelligent Halo, and so on and so forth. There are countless of them. Under certain factors, these Halos can be converted into one another. For example, the protagonist Halo. Under certain conditions, it can be converted into the supporting role Halo, and the supporting role Halo can also be converted into the protagonist Halo. Sometimes, this conversion may fail, and once it fails, the Halo will naturally break. Supporting role Halo, passerby Halo, brilliant Halo. Luo Fan repeated what the miniature protagonist Halo said, his expression becoming more and more unsightly. As the miniature protagonist Halo spoke, it felt that the situation was not right, so it hurriedly shut its mouth. After a long period of silence, Luo Fan faintly said, "These. There doesn't seem to be any in the memories you handed over. This, I might have forgotten before." The miniature protagonist Halo slightly trembled and said with some hesitation. Luo Fan faintly said, "Is that so? Then what else did you forget before?" There isn't much left. Such as, actually, in addition to continuously upgrading the protagonist Halo. In fact, it can also be converted. It can be converted into the transcendent Halo, or the sage Halo. The miniature protagonist Halo said carefully. Transcendent Halo, Sage Halo. At this moment, Luo Fan made up his mind. He must find a way to directly search for the true memories of this miniature protagonist Halo. Just the names of these two Halos were already extraordinary and brought great temptation to him. This was already extremely extraordinary and brought him a great temptation. Would there be even more secrets hidden in this mini protagonist Halo's memory? Contain even deeper secrets? Would there be even more incredible Halos? As if seeing Luo Fan's determination, the miniature protagonist Halo hurriedly shouted, "It's not that I don't want to hand over these memories. It's just that I really can't. These are inherited memories hidden in my essence. Even I can only read them. There is no way to copy them. Luo Fan faintly smiled and said, "Tell me, what is the transcendent halo? What is the sage halo?" The miniature protagonist halo at this time trembled and said, "Master, you must believe me. I really didn't mean to hide it. Don't you dare invade my memories. If these memories are touched, I will directly self-destruct." Luo Fan frowned. How much of these words were true and how much was false? Even he couldn't tell. "What evidence do you have to prove what you said?" Luo Fan asked lightly. "Evidence?" The miniature protagonist halo paused, and for a moment did not know what to say. How could there be evidence for this kind of thing? It said it so sincerely, but Luo Fan still did not believe it. Then even if it took out more evidence, Luo Fan would not believe it. At this time, the miniature protagonist halo was extremely regretful, regretting that it did not make things clear in the first place. It also regretted that it did not choose to say things because of the fragment of the protagonist halo. At this time, it could only give up and said, "I have no evidence." Hearing this, Luo Fan frowned and said, "You have no evidence. How do you want me to believe you?" Finally, the miniature protagonist halo could not help but struggle for the last time. "What I said is true. These memories weren't personally experienced by me, but rather the inheritance I received when I was born. Look at the memories I gave you. Aren't they very complete, without any mistakes? Isn't this the best evidence?" "These can all be faked," Luo Fan said lightly. This kind of stubborn, stone-hearted appearance made the mini-protagonist halo almost despair. After waiting for a while, seeing that the miniature protagonist halo had nothing to say, Luo Fan said, "Tell me your hidden memories first. If I am satisfied, maybe I will give up on the plan to investigate." This was the miniature protagonist halo's last hope. Naturally, it hurriedly agreed and said yes. First, let's talk about the transcendent halo and the sage halo. What are the functions of these two halos?